I'd been rubbing the turkey with butter and sage since 6 in the morning, ironing the tablecloth and lighting candles. By 6 in the evening, it was "will be late" and hearts in the chat. I opened my granddaughter's Instagram. They were already at the restaurant, glasses clinking, toasting, to the family. I arrived with pie. The table was for 6. They saved a place for me, live on my phone. If you're ready for this journey, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give this a like so you don't miss the updates. And let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. It's always lovely to see where everyone is. I'm Linda, 66, recently silver, and I still wear Tom's flannel when the house creaks after midnight. Tom was my husband for 42 Thanksgivings. He used to sneak an extra stick of butter into the mashed potatoes like a kid hiding contraband. He'd tap the turkey pan like a snare drum and announce, "Birds on parade!" And he was the only person on earth who could make my sister Barbara stop talking with nothing but a raised eyebrow. When he died 3 years ago, pancreatic cancer, we learned doublespeak. Words like celebration of life. Like that wouldn't make a widow want to spit nails. I survived by cooking. I measured grief in teaspoons, in cups of flour, in roasts that took all day so I didn't have to answer the silence. This year was supposed to be different. It was my first Thanksgiving with the new normal actually starting to feel normal. I'd invited my daughter, Ashley, her husband, Brian, their 22-year-old, Emma, and my son, Danny, who was flying in from Denver. The leaf was in the dining room table, the good crystal had been washed, and I'd even ironed the napkins. I was a decade overdue for a day that went according to the list. At 4, a text. "We're running behind, Mom. Save us a plate." At 5, a heart emoji and a turkey gif. At 5:30, another heart. The gravy had skinned over twice by the time 6 chimed. That's when I made a mistake. I opened Instagram. Emma, my sweet, whip-smart, social media native granddaughter, was live. There they were at Hearth and Harbor, the fancy place downtown with Edison bulbs and menus that read like a poem. The caption, "When your family really shows up." I stared at the screen while the faces of strangers slid hearts up the glass. The server poured wine, they raised their glasses to family, and I froze like the first day after Tom's funeral when the phone stopped ringing. I'm not a crier. My mother was a crier. She could water a garden with a country song. Me, I get very still, and my brain starts lining up pushpins and string. I took out the turkey, slid it into the cold oven so the cat wouldn't get ideas, set the table for 1, and made a plate. I cut a wedge of pie, put the rest in the tin, covered it with foil, and tucked it under my arm like a football. Then I walked 2 houses over to the Armstrongs, who had an inflatable pilgrim in the yard that looked like it had a stroke. I knocked. "Happy Thanksgiving," I said, thrusting the pie at them, and went home to listen to my radiator clink. You'll want to know why I didn't drive to the restaurant and make a scene. Believe me, I pictured it. I imagined walking in, setting the pie on their linen, and using my church voice to say, "Excuse me, but your mother-in-law is basting alone." But I don't humiliate people in public, even when they deserve it. And, this is important, Hearth and Harbor isn't just any restaurant. The year before Tom died, Brian had this dream of upscaling the gastropub scene. He had charisma and a chin dimple, and a gift for saying, "Trust me," like a spell. We didn't have the money to invest, not really. But Tom liked the idea of leaving the kids something that wasn't just a house filled with old tax returns and boxes labeled Xmas Lights ? Hearth and Harbor needed a bridge loan when construction ran long and vendors wanted cash. The bank's loan officer said no without a guarantor. That guarantor was me, against my paid-off ranch house, because grief makes you bold and dumb in equal parts. But I wasn't completely dumb. I'd worked 32 years at a credit union, the last 10 as branch manager. I read every line. The loan documents had my signature, but so did another pair. A convertible note I purchased from the LLC that owned the restaurant, and a side letter no one in our family ever asked about again. The note said that if certain conditions were breached, like missing quarterly investor updates or comping more than 5% of a month's receipts without board notice, I could convert the outstanding balance to equity at a preset valuation. The side letter gave me one private owner's night each calendar year, my right to reserve the entire dining room with 30 days' notice, with food at cost and labor paid by the restaurant. Brian joked at the time, "We'll throw you a whole Thanksgiving if you want." And Tom laughed, and I kept the papers in a blue folder behind the tax returns, just in case.
By 8, Emma's live stream had ended. A text pinged. "Mom, don't wait up. Love you." Then, "We'll swing by for leftovers tomorrow." I could practically hear Brian's voice in the syntax. Brian spoke in wheeze when he wanted to kick a can. He reserved I's for his successes. I didn't reply. I pulled out the blue folder. The turkey cooled in the oven, and the house smelled like the holiday my parents used to make out of nothing. "Well, Tom," I said out loud, "let's get to work." In the morning, my phone rang at 9 sharp. It was Danny. "Mom, my flight got canceled, snowstorm," he said, guilty as a golden retriever sitting in a foam couch. I tried. "I know, honey," I said. "I watched your sister's Thanksgiving on Instagram." Dead air. Then a sputter. Was it bad?" "It was enlightening." Danny has a way of apologizing that makes your shoulders drop. He offered to fly me out for the weekend, but I declined. "I have a pie cooling and some light reading," I said, patting the blue folder. "Besides, we'll do our Thanksgiving on Sunday. I'll pick you up at the airport." "Mom?" "Yes, baby." "Don't let Brian spin this." I smiled, a closed-lipped smile he couldn't see. "I won't." At 10:30, I put on my going to church, but I might also paint a fence outfit, black slacks, red cardigan, sturdy boots, and drove downtown. Hearth and Harbor's front windows fogged with steam from the kitchen, the sidewalk smelled like rosemary. Inside, the hostess, young, sweet, nervous, perked up at the sight of a woman my age like maybe I was someone's mother with a complaint. "I'm meeting someone," I said. I wasn't lying. I was meeting myself. The GM's office was a glass-walled cube behind the bar. Brian sat inside with his laptop open and an espresso he'd talk about later as single origin. He stood when he saw me, which is what I taught him to do in 2003 when he started dating my daughter. "Linda, happy Thanksgiving." Well, day after. He stepped forward like I might hug him, and I kept my purse up like a shield. He pivoted to a performance smile. "How was your day?" "Quiet," I said. "Yours looked lively." He had the decency to blush. The restaurant had a staff tasting/friendsgiving, very last minute. You know how the holidays get. He dragged a chair out. "Sit down, let me get you something. Coffee, tea? We have a chai the influencers would sell their grandma for." "I brought my own," I said, placing a stainless tumbler on his desk and the blue folder beside it. "We need to talk." Brian darted glances to the bar, to the kitchen, to the hostess, pretending not to see. He lowered his voice. "If this is about last night, I told Ashley to text, but service was insane, and then Emma hijacked—" "Brian," I said, "I'm not here to discuss your manners." Relief clouded his eyes so fast I almost laughed. "Oh, good," he said, "because I thought, the optics." "Sit," I said. He sat. I opened the blue folder. "We're going to talk about governance." Brian blinked. "Like Congress?" "Like your investor updates, which I haven't received since spring. Like comping practices, which appeared generous. Like the owner's rights you agreed to when you needed money in a pinch." I slid the convertible note across the desk. 2 quarters with no reports constitutes a breach. He glanced, then performed a shrug. "We've been busy. I'd never—" "You'd never what?" I asked. "Forget? Misplace? Neglect? You'd never assume the woman who signed her house to guarantee your dream wouldn't notice when you stopped communicating?" He shifted. "I can send over the updates. It's all good news." "Lovely," I said. "And while you do, I'm exercising my owner's night." His eyebrows hopped. "You want to book a table?" "I want to book the restaurant." He queued up a grin like a bad Wi-Fi signal. "Okay, that's big."
For when? Saturday, 3 weeks from now. Your busiest week of the quarter, if I remember my old reports right. Brian's grin winked out. We have a wedding buyout on that Saturday. Afternoon wedding. They'll be out by 5. My event is 7 to 10. Your side letter says I can reserve with 30 days notice, and it's 22 days, but you have the reports 2 quarters late, so we can call it even. I don't think that's how contracts work, he said weakly. Then perhaps ask your lawyer. I already asked mine. He thumbed his phone. I need to loop in Ash, and I need you to put me on the calendar.
We did this, I corrected. Brian emerged from the office with a face like someone told him the health inspector parked out back. Linda, he said, can we talk for a minute? We can talk for 5, I said. And we ducked into a quiet corner by the coat rack. He rubbed his hands together. Look, I'm impressed, truly. The response has been insane. We have 300 RSVPs and a wait list. This is great for the brand. Is that what we're calling feeding people now? I asked mildly. He plowed on. I just want to make sure the messaging is simple, I said. Neighbors feed neighbors. Tips go to the staff, donations go to the pantry. And Hearth and Harbor shines, he added, half joking, half not. I said the restaurant serves. Ashley arrived then, wearing flats and an expression like she hadn't slept. She kissed my cheek without quite making contact. Mom, she said, this is beautiful. It will be, I said. Grab an apron. She blinked. An apron? I said you wanted to make it up to me. We're out of aprons that match your hair, but we'll try to cope. She sighed and tied on gray canvas like it carried all our years. The doors opened at 7. People poured in. A river of faces I knew from church pews and post office lines and the lanes at Kroger. The room smelled like garlic and warmth, and the Edison bulbs made everyone look kinder. Emma stood at the host stand with a Sharpie and a smile, scribbling names on tent cards. Danny had flown in that afternoon and was bussing tables like he owned the place. My sister Barb commanded the drink station like a general. Rosa's daughter, hair in 2 glossy braids, tucked napkins under forks with the seriousness of a surgeon. The lifestyle editor filmed a slow pan of pies like they were celebrities at a premiere. And just when he thought he had me backed into a corner, he forgot who he was dealing with. Stick with me, because you'll want to see how this plays out. Midway through the night, the mayor showed up with a check and a camera crew from the city's public access channel, a man with a tripod and enthusiasm that made up for everything else. He shook my hand and said into the lens, "This is community." And my phone lit with messages from people I hadn't heard from since the Clinton years. "Saw you on Channel 8. You look fantastic." The donation jar, an old pickle jar Barb had bedazzled with Mod Podge, filled so fast we had to swap it for a stock pot. Brian hovered at the bar, smiling when people looked and calculating when they didn't. Twice he tried to pull Marco aside, and twice Marco said, "After service." Ashley refilled water glasses like she was paying off a debt 1 drop at a time. Emma glowed. At 9, I walked into the kitchen with the shoebox of cash tips, placed it on the pass, and rang the bell. The clang grabbed every eye. "This," I said, tapping the box, "came from women with hips and knees that ache, from men who work the swing shift, from kids who emptied piggy banks. It's for you." I nodded to the line cooks, the dishwashers, the runners. Every cent. A murmur rose that felt like a hymn. Rosa made a sound like she'd been handed a reprieve. The dishwasher, tall, quiet, wiped his eyes with his sleeve. Brian sidled up, trying to stand next to generosity as if it would rub off on his blazer. "On behalf of Hearth and Harbor, on behalf of neighbors," I said, without looking at him. He backed up a fraction and plastered on his brand smile. "I'll say this.
It was a good night. A pure one, even. We plated 302 dinners, we ran out of collard gratin and invented a surprise vegetables plate that was a hit. People laughed and hugged and signed up for shifts at the pantry. I watched Ashley see me the way the town did, not as the person you forget when the lighting is good, but as a pillar with crow's feet and a spine. At 10, we closed the doors. The dining room was a confetti of crumbs and good intentions. I helped stack chairs, wiped a table, then waved at Marco. "Can we borrow the office?" I asked. "There's a conversation we need to move from overheard to on record." "Now?" he asked. "Now." We filed into the glass cube. Me, Brian, Ashley, Marco. Emma hovered outside like a guard, texting Danny, who took up a post by the door with his arms crossed like a bouncer. Brian tried for jaunty. "If this is about next year, let's get you on the books. It's about this year and about the future. Please sit." He didn't. "I prefer to stand." "Then stand."
I took out the convertible note and placed it on the desk. You promise quarterly updates. You missed 2. You promised to keep comped meals under 5%. According to your own system, I tapped his laptop, you comped $8,247 last month alone, and that is more than 5% of gross receipts. That includes a private dinner on Thanksgiving for 11. I slid printed screenshots of his back-end POS system, kindly provided by Marco, who thought the truth should travel, across the desk. Also, you used Owner's Night to promote your personal brand the day after you declined to join your mother-in-law at her table. That breach is moral, but these are legal. He swallowed, the bob of his Adam's apple a metronome. "I can explain." "Don't," I said. "I'm converting my note." Ashley gasped. "Mom, I told you weeks ago." He didn't listen. Brian's polite face crumpled like receipt paper. "You can't—" "I can," I said, sliding the signed conversion form across the desk. "And I have proxies from 2 other investors who are tired of hearing 'trust me' without math. That gives us a majority. Per the operating agreement," I laid that paper down, "we can call for a vote." "A vote for what?" Ashley whispered. "For a change in management," I said, "effective immediately." Ashley's hand flew to her mouth. "Mom, no." Brian recovered enough to sneer. "You don't know the first thing about running a restaurant." "You are half right," I said. "I know the first thing about math, and I know the second thing about how people behave when no one is watching. But I'm not running a restaurant. Marco is." Marco, who'd been leaning silently against the file cabinet, straightened up. "Me?" "Interim," I said, "if you accept." He looked at the kitchen like it was a child he loved. "I accept." Brian laughed a laugh with no humor in it. "This is insane. You can't just install the chef because you baked some pies and raised money for a food bank." "You'd be surprised what a woman can do with a side letter," I said, deadpan. "Also, more than pies." Ashley looked between the men. She looked younger than she had an hour before. "Brian?" He spread his hands. "This is a stunt. She's mad about Thanksgiving and using the restaurant to, what, get revenge? Make contents of her own?" I breathed in. "I don't do stunts, Brian. I do ledgers. You missed 2 reports. You comped more than 5%. You treated employees like background actors in your personal brand reel, and you forgot who owns what." I held up a paper. "I now own 26%. With the proxies, that's 52. Majority." I set the paper down gently. "I don't want to destroy what you built. I want to save it from you." He stared at me like I was speaking a language he refused to learn. Ashley said soft, "Mom, what about the family?" "We just fed the family," I said, nodding toward the dining room. "We'll talk about you and me tomorrow." Brian leaned on the desk. "You won't get away with this." "Get away with it?" I smiled, and it wasn't kind. "We're doing it in glass, Brian. That's the point." He opened his mouth, closed it, then did what people like him do when cornered. He blustered. "I'll sue. I'll call the bank. I'll tell them you're trying to tank the business.
I'll tell the staff you're replacing them with volunteers." He reached for the office door. I stepped aside. "Call whoever you like, but maybe don't call the bank right now. Deshawn's at his granddaughter's play." His head snapped back. "You talked to the bank?" I tilted my head. "I talked to everyone." Ashley looked at me then like I'd grown antlers. "Mom, you did all this in 3 weeks?" "Dear, I did most of it in 3 days. The rest was just pie crust." He glared. "This is overreach." "This is stewardship," I said. "We're voting. Now." We did. Marco raised his hand. I counted my proxies. Brian said no, voice tight like fishing line. Ashley abstained, torn down the middle. The eyes had it. The thing about moments like that is they feel cinematic and also deeply mundane. You sign papers and ballpoint pen that skip on the glossy places. You staple things and the staples misbehave. You send an email and your phone buzzes because you forgot to turn off notifications. But then the world tilts, and the ball you've been pushing up the hill pauses, and you realize you aren't Sisyphus. You're a 66-year-old woman in a red cardigan, and you just changed the direction of a river.
He was about to get exactly what he deserved, and I had a front row seat. Don't go anywhere. We left the office. The dining room smelled like cooling bread. Brian stalked toward the kitchen, then thought better of it and veered toward the alley exit. Ashley stood alone by the host's stand, the apron strings twisting in her fingers. Emma crossed to her and took her hand. They looked like a picture I'd seen once in a magazine, a painting of 2 women on a dock watching a storm roll past. I wanted to put my hands on their backs and anchor them, but anchors are heavy, and I needed to be light. Danny hugged me from behind like when he was 8 and scared of thunder. That was, he groped for a word, biblical. "Let's not bring God into this more than we already did," I said, leaning into him. "I have one more thing to do before I go home." I found Rosa in the kitchen, counting ladles. "Your daughter did good," I said. "She'll sleep hard," Rosa said, smiling small. "We all will." "I hope so," I said. I handed her an envelope with her name on it. She opened it, saw the number, and covered her mouth. "For Christmas. For whatever makes your heart quieter." She kissed my cheek, flour and tears on my skin. "You are family," she said. I walked out into the November cold. The air had that final week of fall bite, like the year is clearing its throat before it sings the last verse. I looked up at the restaurant sign, Hearth and Harbor. A place to warm up, a place to dock. I thought about Tom's flannel, about the ironing board, about the turkey that tasted even better the next day with mayonnaise and salt. I thought about the clause in the trust Miss Ferguson had drafted and the email I'd send in the morning. No show, no dough, year 3. Funds to be dispersed to, and I mentally listed the food bank, the shelter, the clinic that fixed teeth for free. I thought about my daughter, about apologies that aren't words, but work. I went home. I put my shoes by the mat, fed the cat, and finally, let myself cry. Not the garden watering kind, the kind that comes out in 3 neat sobs and then makes room for air. I washed my face, I put on Tom's flannel, and I got into bed and set an alarm for 8 because I had things to do in the morning, and I am not a woman who lies in a bed and hopes life calls her back. I call it. At 8:05, I emailed Miss Ferguson with 3 charities. At 8:10, I texted Deshawn to say, management update, effective immediately. At 8:30, I called my church and asked if we could open the hall on Sunday for anyone who wanted leftovers in company. At 9 o'clock, there was a knock on my door. It was Ashley, hair in a bun, eyes swollen. She stood on my porch like the little girl who'd once knocked on the bathroom door after slicing her finger learning to shave. "Mom," she said, "can we?" "We can," I said, stepping aside. She came in, took off her shoes without being asked, and walked to the kitchen.
She ran her finger along the counter like she used to when she thought I wouldn't notice. "We hurt you," she said. "Yes." "I let Brian set the weather," she whispered. "He says what day it is and I wear a coat." "You can check a forecast," I said gently. She laughed one broken syllable. I was so embarrassed when Emma went live. They all saw us, my friends, our neighbors. I felt showy. She looked at me. "You were alone." I was, and then I wasn't. We sat at the table. She held her mug like she needed its heat. "If you want me to leave him, I want you to do what makes you safe and whole," I said. "I want you to stop writing off your mother for a man who thinks brand is bigger than bread. And I want you to understand that consequences are the story we tell ourselves about the choices we made." She nodded. "He's gonna say you blew up his business. I'm gonna say I saved it. And I'm gonna show my math." She smiled then, a tiny thing like a pilot light. "Emma says you're a baddie. I prefer woman who reads fine print." And we both laughed, because that's the kind of joke that makes a new day possible. After she left, I went online. I don't post much. I still think in paper. But I wrote something I needed on my own page, next to a picture of a pie with a missing slice. "If you ever feel like you set a table and ate alone, come sit with me. We have chairs." The comments filled with hearts, and because humans are still mostly excellent, offers to bring napkins, to bring rolls, to bring the neighbor who doesn't have anyone. By afternoon, the local paper's online article went up. "Matriarch turns missed dinner into community feast." There was a picture of me with flour on my cheek, Marco behind me like a guardian, and the caption misidentified me as Lydia, which is about right for journalism these days. The point was the picture. A woman old enough to know better, with a blue folder just out of frame, smiling like she knows something you don't. Because I did.
The something was this. Thanksgiving had been a bluff I called. The clause in the trust was a lever. The restaurant was a stage. But the real trick, the one Tom would have recognized, because card tricks were the only thing he was ever smug about, wasn't the paperwork or the proxies. It was remembering that I have agency. That's a word Emma uses, and I like it because it sounds like an office full of women in sensible shoes getting things done. And because I'm telling you the truth, that's the deal here, I'll admit this. I had one more card in the deck. A different set of documents, signed in ink not yet dry, a plan that would make Brian realize Thanksgiving wasn't the first time he'd poured a toast to family without checking who owned the bottle. The ink not yet dry documents weren't dramatic to look at, just a stack of plain paper in a Staples binder with my neat little tabs, but they were the difference between a storm and a forecast. See, the minute I realized Brian thought Instagram was a board meeting, I did two things. I made a pot of coffee strong enough to grow chest hair, and I called 3 people Tom would have called. Our attorney, our old bookkeeper from my credit union days, and Mr. Lake, the landlord who still mows his own lawn and thinks Bluetooth is a dental condition. From Miss Ferguson, I got language, a management services agreement that would allow Harbor Steward LLC, a new entity I organized, with me as manager and Marco as operating partner, to run Hearth and Harbor under a fee structure tied to revenue and service benchmarks. We added a staff profit share baked right in, because I wanted the people sweating on the line to have more than a pat on the back. From Ruthie, the bookkeeper with a memory like a steel trap and a pencil that still gets licked, I got clarity on what reports were missing and how to ask for them so no one could squirm. And from Mr. Lake, I got a handshake, followed by a lease amendment with my name on it. Turns out when a tenant forgets rent twice in a quarter, Brian called it a delay. Mr. Lake called a delay what it is, not a payment. A landlord takes an interest in who's steering the ship. I didn't take the lease. I'm not a pirate. I simply negotiated a right of cure and a right of first refusal if there was a change in control or a default. He liked change in control, said it sounded like I watched CNBC.
By the time I walked into that glass office and told Brian I was converting my note, the management agreement had been signed by a majority of members, thank you proxies, and Mr. Lake had initialed a paragraph that said in plain English, "If the kids start playing with matches, the grown-up gets the matches." That's the paper he never saw on the desk, tucked behind the blue folder like a queen behind a pawn. The morning after the community dinner, I woke up with the kind of back you get after bussing tables in sensible shoes. I microwaved coffee, ate leftover collard gratins straight from the dish like a raccoon, and opened my email to a message from Brian with a subject line that made me snort. Urgent, brand integrity. Always with the brand, like you can butter toast with a hashtag. He'd CC'd investors and attached a PDF that could have been titled, "Why This Isn't My Fault." It blamed rogue governance maneuvers, me, overzealous culinary staff, Marco, and confusing investor communication requirements, English. He proposed a cooling-off period and a mediated return to status quo. That's a lot of words for "put my toys back." I hit reply all. "Good morning," I wrote. The status quo was non-compliance. The cooling-off period was called 2 quarters with no updates. We've engaged Harbor Steward LLC to stabilize operations with staff profit sharing and transparent reporting. Please find the executed management agreement and the calendar invite for a members meeting on Tuesday at 4 p.m. We'll walk through numbers, the bank's comfort letter, and the plan through Q2. Coffee provided, hashtags optional. Then I did my mascara and called Deshaun. He laughed that baritone Sunday laugh of his. "Miss Kincaid, I got your note. If operations improve even a pinch from where they were, we'll all sleep better. Thin margins get thicker when folks stop giving away dinner to their Instagram cousins." I said, "Bless you and your metaphors. We'll have a monthly package on your desk. The first one will include an actual budget." He said, "Be still my beating heart." By 1, Marco and I were sitting at the corner table with a legal pad and 2 orders of staff meal. He wore his serious face. He only has 2. Serious, and laughing so hard he scares people. And I wore my reader glasses on a chain because I am that woman now and I'm leaning in. He said, "We have 28 staff," tapping the pad. "Front of house is strong, but training is inconsistent. Back of house is loyal, but tired. Scheduling's been chaos. We need to plug labor into projections, not vibes." "I like you," I said. "You talk like a pilot." He smiled. "We also need to fix comp policy. I'm not giving away desserts to content partners while Rosa pays double rent in December." "New policy is simple," I said. "Comps require 2 signatures, you and the shift lead, and a reason written in actual words, not networking. Networking is what happens when you call your aunt for napkins." We built a plan. Training, menus that respected season and cost, a tip-out schedule written in English and Spanish and posted where everyone could see. Profit share would be quarterly with a clear formula. If there's one thing I learned moving up at the credit union, it's that people will work like a choir of angels if you tell them the hymn and mean it. At 3, Emma came in with a ring light in her tote and an expression like she was asking permission. "Can I film a little?" she asked. "Not faces, just hands. I want to talk about last night. Not in a drama way, in a this is what community looks like way. People my age, we don't see this enough without strings attached." "If you say content, I'm cutting the Wi-Fi," I said, but I was smiling. "Yes, baby, film hands." Her video that night was a slow roll over flour-dusted fingers, steam rising from a pan, Rose's daughter stabbing napkins into fan shapes. Her caption read, "Last night my Nana taught me that family is something you do." It got a lot of hearts. More importantly, it got people signing up for pantry shifts and asking how to pay staff more fairly. Brian posted a black and white selfie with the caption, "Leadership is lonely," which got fewer hearts, and a comment from someone named Fit Brandon that said, "Haters motivate me." I didn't respond. I was busy learning the new dish machine because Luis had gone home early with a fever, and I can put a rack through with the best of them. Tuesday's members meeting felt like Thanksgiving with people you actually want to talk to. The silent investors showed up in sweater vests, warily hopeful. Ashley came in late, sat next to Marco, and took notes like the teacher's pet she used to be. Brian didn't come. His lawyer did. A man with hair like a helmet and a tie you could use to flag down a boat. He said words like ultra-vires and chancery, and Miss Ferguson smiled like a substitute teacher who lets you use a calculator but knows you'll get the wrong answer anyway. We walked through the numbers, the actual bank ledger, not the glossy deck with mountains that go up. Food cost had been managed by pretending free meals weren't food. Labor cost had been optimized by making people do 2 jobs for 1 paycheck. And revenue had been driven by something called collaborations, which appears to be when Brian invited men with ring lights to drink for free and call it marketing. We voted to ratify the management agreement, to institute training, to adopt a comp policy that required reason and oversight. We voted to add a staff representative to the members' advisory committee, Rosa, nominated by Marco and seconded by the dishwasher who cried when he opened his envelope. When the lawyer barked about process, Miss Ferguson handed him a copy of the operating agreement with the relevant paragraphs highlighted in a highlighter so bright it could stop traffic. He harumphed. We adjourned. I brought a pie because old habits die hard, and people ate it like they'd earned it, which they had. At home that night, I pulled out the trust binder and reread the no-show, no-dough clause because sometimes you need to remind yourself you weren't being petty. You were sticking to a promise you and your husband made with your eyes open. The trust had a distribution every December, nothing that would make headlines, but enough to cover a semester at state or a new roof. It was designed to reward showing up, not to punish missing out. Tom said, "If we don't eat together, what are we building?" When we signed it, we all hugged and joked about the year someone would get the flu, and we'd put a thermometer in the centerpiece. This year, Danny bought a doctor's note from the airlines and an actual blizzard. He's fine. Ashley and Emma got a mirror. I sent Miss Ferguson the formal notice. No family distribution for year 3. Per the clause, funds to the food bank, the clinic, and scholarships we set up in Tom's name for kids who want to train in HVAC and nursing, because the world needs warm houses and good nurses more than it needs influencers in free jackets. I didn't gloat. I did, however, sleep like bread cooling on a rack. And just when he thought he could PR his way out of math, he forgot numbers don't blink. Stick with me, because you'll want to see how this plays out. The pushback started Thursday. First came a text from Ashley. "Brian says you're weaponizing charity." I let that marinate and replied, "Brian thinks a stop sign is a suggestion." Then came an email from Brian's lawyer threatening an injunction to restore prior management. Miss Ferguson responded with 3 attachments, 6 case citations, and a polite invitation to bring it to court where daylight lives. Then came something I didn't expect. A DM from a woman named Karina, who runs the beverage program at another restaurant across town. "Are you the Linda with the blue folder?" she wrote. I admitted, as charged. She said, "Heads up, your guy has been doing some sketchy collab dinners where distributors comp more than they should, and somehow he gets kickbacks in points. Might be nothing, might also be why you're always out of the wine that sells and drowning in the one he posts with his face." I didn't touch it. I don't go digging in the legal compost unless I have gloves. I sent the tip to Miss Ferguson, who sent it to a compliance friend of hers with a note that said, "Worth a look?" I told Marco, who grimaced and said, "We'll handle it clean. No one's getting fired today. We'll audit purchasing and reset. Full stop." That's why I like him. He fixes the pipe without flooding the house. Meanwhile, the staff did something I didn't plan. They bloomed. When people aren't waiting for the other shoe to drop, they lift their heads. Luis trained a teenager from his building to be a runner, and I've never seen someone memorize a floor map so fast. Rosa pitched a lunch special with the collard stems and Parmesan that made the kind of money you can count without swearing. The host stand started writing "Welcome home" on the chalkboard because Emma said it once and it stuck. Tips went up, breaks got taken, someone actually repaired the broken hinge on the mop closet. It felt like opening a window in a house that's been shut too long. We hosted Matriarchs Night the following Wednesday, my one owner's night each year, repurposed, where we invited widows, single grandpas, anyone with a picture in their wallet of someone who isn't here. No speeches, no cameras, just comfort. The dining room sounded like a train station at Christmas in 1958. Clatter and warmth and stories that begin with, "When your grandfather..." I sat next to a woman who'd been married to the same man for 56 years. She taught me a trick for keeping pie crust from shrinking. Freeze it for 10 minutes before baking. Who knew? We sent them home with leftovers in containers I bought on the internet by the hundred, and Sharpies that wrote, "For later, love, us." I found one of those containers in our fridge the next day with, "Linda, eat lunch" on it, and I cried like a normal person for exactly 40 seconds. By then, the town had made up its mind about the restaurant. The food was good, the place felt honest, and if you came twice in a month, someone remembered how you take your coffee. The paper did a follow-up piece with Marco's tattooed basil leaves front and center, and a quote from me that said, "Governance is just love with spreadsheets," which is corny, but so am I. Brian posted a photo of himself on a treadmill and a caption about mental health in leadership, which I sincerely hope he tends to because everyone deserves peace. He also started sending Marco emails with subject lines like questions and bodies like, "Why are we making less content?" Marco replied, "Because we're making more soup." I put that on a sticky note on my fridge. Then came the first real hit back. A letter from a very important law firm with a watermark you can see from space, giving me 24 hours to cease using the name Hearth and Harbor on any event that was not brand approved, cease acting as manager of record, and restore the founding vision. The founding vision, in case you're wondering, was men with good jawlines drinking things I comp. I took the letter to Miss Ferguson and to the trademark attorney she recommended the day after Thanksgiving when she asked, "Out of curiosity, has anyone actually filed the mark for the restaurant name?" And I had said, "Not that the USPTO shows." And she had smiled and said, "Would you like to file an intent to use for the mark on the category of charitable events and community dinners? It's adjacent and accurate." I signed, and she had filed. Ink not yet dry. We didn't file to be petty. We filed because Brian had a habit of yelling "brand" when he meant me, and I wanted a boundary. The community dinners were not content. When the letter arrived, Miss Ferguson replied with a packet: our filing, our use in commerce receipts, the management agreement, and a letter from Mr. Lake affirming that in the event of conflicting claims, he recognizes Harbor Steward as the controlling manager for on-premises operations. She wrote, "We are not your enemy, we are the adults in the room. Please stop mistaking governance for attack." That night, my daughter came over with a box of photos. We sat on the floor, cross-legged like we were 30 again, and sorted. There was Tom in a paper turkey hat. There was Ashley at 9 with bangs she cut herself. There was me at 28 holding up a pie like a diploma. Ashley placed a picture of Brian face down on the stack, and then placed it face up again, like she couldn't decide if she was writing history or reading it. She said, "He isn't a monster." I said I didn't say he was. I said he isn't the manager we need. He thinks you hate him.
"I don't," I said. "I hate what he does to you. I hate what he did to this place, calling it love." She nodded, slow. "He said you were going to run him out of town. I'd be delighted if he stayed and learned something," I said, "but I'm not in charge of his feet." She laughed, and this time it wasn't a broken sound. "I joined a support group," she said, surprising herself, I think, by saying it out loud. "For partners of... it's not addicts, exactly. It's people who are married to someone who needs applause more than oxygen." "That's a thing?" I asked, genuinely curious. "It is," she said. "The first step, apparently, is realizing you're allowed to want peace. And the second? Taking off your audience mic," she said, smiling. I kissed her forehead. Tom used to say she had a compass in there pointing north. Maybe it had just needed a new magnet. The next day, Brian showed up at the restaurant at 11 sharp with his very important lawyer and 3 men who work at a PR firm named like a boy band. They stood in the doorway like they were about to film a commercial. I was at the bar checking the till because I like to count things that balance. "We're here to reclaim the space," he said,
as if it were a flag on the moon. Marco stepped out from the pass, wiping his hands. "You're welcome to a reservation," he said. "Table for 4?" The lawyer blustered. "We have an injunction." "No, you have a draft motion you sent as a letter," Miss Ferguson said, appearing from the corner with a smile that made the PR boys whisper to each other. "Court is on Friday. Would you like a seat near the window? It flatters." Brian's nostrils flared. "I built this place." "You did," I said, nodding. "And now we're repairing it." He leaned in. "You are humiliating me." "You are doing that yourself," I said softly. "We're trying to feed people." He looked at the PR boys like they might lift him up on their shoulders and carry him into a montage. They shuffled. The lawyer cleared his throat. "We'll see you in court," he said, like a line from television. They left. The host stand took an actual reservation for 4 for the following Tuesday at 6. Emma wrote B and 3 and put a heart next to it, because she is my granddaughter and compassion is a reflex. Court on Friday was a lot of oak and echoes. We dressed nice because respect matters. The judge was a woman with gray hair and a timeline you couldn't fudge. Brian's lawyer argued that I had weaponized a technicality to, quote, stage a hostile takeover. Miss Ferguson argued that we had enforced the plain language of agreements to correct breaches and protect a going concern. She brought pie charts, which she later admitted she designed partly because she knew I would be tickled. The bank submitted a letter saying we were current and the plan looked sane. Rosa submitted a statement about breaks taken and tips counted. Mr. Lake submitted a paragraph written in his careful hand about sleeping better when the people in charge return emails. The judge ruled that day. Harbor Steward remains in place as interim manager. Members' vote stands. Comp policy stands. Trademark dispute to be decided later, but meanwhile, no one is to use community dinners for personal promotion. And, counsel, she added to the man with the helmet hair, don't send me letters with watermarks like I owe you money. The gallery tittered. We went back to the restaurant and made soup. And I know this part is hard to hear, but it's important. The truth was about to come out, and it was going to be glorious. Because while all that was happening, lawyers filing, judges judging, pies cooling, Ruthie the bookkeeper was doing what Ruthie does, reconciling. She found things. Not crimes, not the kind you call the evening news about, just choices. A collab that looked like a vacation with a receipt for brand alignment. A content shoot that was a suit fitting with a tailor you could only find if you knew the secret staircase. A consulting fee to a limited company registered to a co-working space that, when you looked closer, was Brian's college roommate's side hustle. It was all technically explainable if you squinted and wanted to be nice. But taken together, it was a pattern. The restaurant wasn't bleeding out. It was nickeled and dimed into anemia. We created a no more nonsense report and brought it to the members. We didn't release it publicly. We're not trying to burn down houses. We showed the investors where the holes were, how we patched them, and how the staff profit share would work going forward. We proposed a severance for Brian if he'd sign a mutual non-disparagement and agreed to leave operations alone. 3 months of salary, his title founder on the website under a page called Our Story, and 2 free dinners a month with a max comp of $150 because I am not funding Wagyu selfies. He refused on principle. Principles are expensive when they're mostly pride wrapped in adjectives.
Meanwhile, Emma's hands video kept rolling through the internet like yeast in warm water. People showed up with kindness, not phones. A local college asked if they could send hospitality students to shadow Marco, because apparently ethics in service is a class now. A man from the city called about a grant for workforce training. We set up Safe Shift Sundays. If you're in a bad spot and need to talk to someone with a resource list and a cup of coffee, the bar is open from 10 to noon. No booze, just kindness. It sounds corny. It is. It works. Then the news I knew was coming but still landed like a dropped tray.
A certified letter addressed to Brian from the distributor about possible non-compliant activity around promotional allowances. I didn't see the contents. That's not my business. I saw the return address and the way his face went from color to ash when he opened it at home because Ashley, who was done being stage manager for someone else's one-man show, called me and said, "He's in trouble." I told her, "He'll fix what he can fix, and he will live with what he can't. This is not your weight to carry." She went quiet and said, "I know. It's weird to say it and mean it." The last domino before Christmas surprised even me. Mr. Lake called. "Linda," he said, "I'm retiring to Florida." He paused, like he was asking me to guess a number. "I want to sell the building to someone who won't throw a DJ booth on the roof. You interested?" I laughed. "With what money, sir?" He cleared his throat. "With the reasonable price and favorable terms for a buyer I trust. You buy it, you keep the rent where it is, plus modest increases. You keep the tenant stable, and you promise me you'll have collard greens on the menu when my flight lands for visits." I sat down. "Let me see what I can do." Deshawn did some bank magic. I did some math a third grader could admire. The silent investors did something remarkable. They said yes to putting money into the thing that actually makes wealth, which in my opinion is stability. We formed a little real estate LLC with me as manager, and we signed papers the day before Christmas Eve. I wore my red cardigan and brought Mr. Lake a pecan pie. He cried. I cried. The notary cried because she said the smell reminded her of her grandmother, who used to let her roll pie dough just to learn. We didn't tell Brian. Not because I wanted to play gotcha, but because the landlord doesn't consult the former manager when he sells the building. Also, I wanted to get through the holidays without a scene. On Christmas Eve, we closed early and fed the staff at family meal tables pushed together in the dining room. There was a tiny tree with ornaments that were terrible, a spoon that said "stir the pot," a whisk with a Santa hat. Rose's daughter played Silent Night on a violin that squeaked and still broke my heart. We passed a bowl and everyone put in a folded paper with "This year I'm grateful for" at the top. I wrote, "People who stay when the cameras leave." Emma wrote, "Nana's blue folder." Marco wrote, "Fire that warms, not burns." He was about to get exactly what he deserved, and I had a front row seat. Don't go anywhere. Because after New Year's, after the sparkle and the resolutions and the last of the tinsel, I sent a letter on letterhead that said Hearth and Harbor Community Table, our registered service mark in its tidy font, to all vendors, including the PR firm that had been billing us $3,000 a month for presents. The letter said, "As of January 1, we are consolidating external communications. No influencer partnerships without signed ROI metrics, no comps without signatures, no photo shoots that require a ladder. The focus is food, the focus is people." 2 vendors wrote back, understood. 1 sent a gif of a dumpster fire, and we fired them. The distributor wrote to Marco, thanking him for the straight talk and setting expectations. We paid bills. We posted schedules 2 weeks out. We made soup and a roasted chicken that tasted like someone loved you. Brian went quiet online. Ashley got louder about therapy and friendships that aren't measuring tapes. Emma posted less and lived more, which is the most Nana thing I could hope for. I thought the story would settle there. We'd run the place, he'd lick his wounds, the town would keep eating collard gratin, and we'd make payroll and profit share, and everyone would forget about Thanksgiving except in the way you remember the year the power went out and you ate cold ham and laughed in the dark.
Then, in mid-January, I got a notice from the USPTO about our mark. The examiner had questions. That's normal. They asked about the distinction between a restaurant and a charitable event within a restaurant. Ms. Ferguson drafted responses. I made coffee. While that mill ground, a different shoe dropped. A glossy magazine, the kind the dentist leaves out to convince you that you and your molar are aspirational, ran a spread on new Southern hospitality. They asked if they could feature us. I said yes with 2 conditions, staff first and no photos of me. I'm not shy, I just prefer to be the voiceover, not the close-up. The spread was beautiful. Rose's hands, Marco's basil, a shot of the dining room with "Welcome Home" on the board. A paragraph that quoted a co-owner, Linda Kincaid, about governance as love. Brian posted a story that said, "Truth will out," which I assume was a subtweet of the universe. Then he called. "I want to meet," he said. "Just us." We met at the park, sitting on a cold bench like teenagers in a John Hughes movie if John Hughes made films about men who underestimate women over 60. He didn't look like a villain. He looked like a tired man in a good coat. "I'm sorry," he said without preamble. Not in a performance way. "I'm sorry for Thanksgiving. I'm sorry for the way I turned everything into a stage." "Thank you," I said. "Apologies are deposits, not balloons. They eventually clear." He smiled. Small. "I'm in some trouble," he said. "With vendors? With brand deals? With myself." He swallowed. "I think I need to leave for a while." "Take care of yourself," I said. "Copy and paste that to your soul." He laughed, surprised. "Then, do I get anything?" I said, "You get a story you can tell when you're 48 and wiser," I said. "You get a severance if you signed the paper Ms. Ferguson drafted. You get dinners with your daughter and granddaughter if you show up without the camera. You get a town that will forgive you if you stop asking it to watch you heal." He nodded. "I signed," he said, and showed me a PDF on his phone. "Send it to your lawyer. I'll be out of the way by Friday. Please keep the name." "We will," I said, "and we will make it mean something." He stood, shoved his hands in his pockets, and walked away in steps that looked like he was practicing leaving. I sat there while the light thinned and the air bit my nose and thought about Tom. He would have said, "Don't gloat, Lynn. It's not pretty." I didn't. I went home and made soup. The next morning, a FedEx envelope landed on my porch from Mr. Lake's lawyer finalizing the building sale paperwork. There was a yellow sticky. "Welcome to landlording. Remember collards." I tucked the deed, my name, my responsibility, into the blue folder and sat with the weight of it. Owning the walls of the place you saved is a quiet kind of revenge, not a scream, a foundation. It meant we could promise things and keep them. It meant the staff could plan. It meant when the roof needed fixing, we'd fix it without a board meeting that turned into a TED Talk. That night, after close, we unlocked the front door for a group of women from the shelter who had just moved into apartments. Emma had set the tables with mismatched thrift store vases and tulips on sale. We served roasted chicken and potatoes with rosemary the way Tom used to, and a lemon thing I still can't make without seeing Miss Ferguson's celiac face. The women ate. They laughed. One of them took 2 dinners home for neighbors she'd met in the hallway that morning. I poured coffee and thought about Thanksgiving. I thought about the iron tablecloth and the cold turkey and the phone screen full of faces without me in them. And then I thought about the dining room full of people I hadn't met on Thanksgiving because I hadn't planned it yet, and how maybe the story wasn't about being left out, but about building a table that didn't leave anyone out. We locked up. The sign in the window glowed. Hearth and Harbor. Home and a safe place to tie your boat. The ending wasn't here yet. There was still one more reveal, one more paper in the blue folder I hadn't told you about, one more twist Tom would have whistled at like I'd pulled a quarter from behind his ear. The plan had always had 3 parts: the dinner, the governance, and well, you'll see. The first week of January tasted like coffee gone lukewarm because you keep putting the mug down to sign one more thing. I'd blink and another form appeared. Vendor confirmations, payroll authorizations, health inspection follow-ups Marco swore he had already filed. He had, of course. They were just filed under a folder called ASAP, which is not so much a system as a mood. If you want to know what saving a restaurant looks like, it's not a montage. It's me sitting at the bar at 6:10 a.m. with my readers on a chain, loading cards into a tip-out calculator I built in a spreadsheet that would make my old credit union proud. It's Rosa texting me a picture of a grocery receipt at 11:43 p.m. with, "Do we want bulk lemons here? Price good." It's Emma teaching Lewis to color code the walk-in with washi tape like a craft blogger, and me making peace with the fact that I now say washi in a sentence and mean it. As the soup days settled into a rhythm, Monday lentil, Wednesday chicken noodle with egg noodles so fat they looked smug, I finally pulled the last tabbed sleeve from my blue folder. This was the paper I mentioned. Not a contract, not a threat, an instruction manual written by a ghost. Tom had left me a letter. The kind of letter you don't open in the first year because you can't see words through tears. And the kind of letter you finally open when your bones tell you it's time to stop waiting for signs and start making them. "Lynn," it began, like he always did when he wanted to be tender and take me down a peg for taking myself too seriously. "If you're reading this,
then life did what life does. He had tucked in a one-page addendum Miss Ferguson notarized the same day we signed the no-show, no-dough clause. Not law, not binding, just a map of the road he hoped I'd choose if our people ever forgot the difference between family and audience. The addendum was simple. If there's a day you realize we're better off making something permanent out of our table, consider setting it up so it can live without anyone's ego. Employee ownership, sweetheart. It's quieter, it's steadier, and it's what you and I always talked about when the bank statements were thin and the casseroles were thick. P.S. Don't let anyone talk you out of your own good sense by calling you sentimental. They have no idea how hard you can count. I read it with the sunlight slanting through my blinds like God was using a ruler. The third part of my plan clicked into place so loudly the cat jumped. We were going to build a structure that couldn't be stolen by a ring light. We were going to set this place up so it kept feeding people long after everyone moved on to the next shiny thing. But I'm getting ahead. First, there were smaller miracles to stack. We turned the dining room into a training lab on Tuesday afternoons. Marco taught a knife skills class to our teens and to 3 ladies from my church who volunteered to be official aunties, the kind of people who will tell you, kindly and loudly, that your cutting board is about to skate off the counter and take your thumb with it. Emma ran a phones down, hands up workshop where she showed the younger servers how to write a story with a guest experience, not with a selfie. If you need content, she said, get their recipe for grief or joy. You can't post it, but you'll carry it longer. We posted a product mix analysis on the back of the walk-in and watched it grow teeth. Servers started upselling the things that loved our margins, and Marco yanked the 2 menu darlings that were bleeding us for the sake of an Instagram swirl. When a regular pouted about his signature drizzle, Marco said, I'll drizzle you olive oil and affection, but the syrup is costing me my dishwasher's shoes. And the man laughed, paid, and tipped like he meant it. By the second week, the staff profit share had a name, the Harbor Pot, and a label on the office shelf that made everything look like a wedding invitation. We didn't put money in the jar literally, we're not amateurs, but you'd be amazed what a jar you can see does to morale, even if the money lives in QuickBooks where it belongs. And just when he thought he could out-PR math, he forgot numbers don't blink. Stick with me, because you'll want to see how this plays out. Brian, for his part, tried 2 strategies at once, the way a toddler might attempt to cry and charm, and neither landed the way he expected. He posted a video about entrepreneurial burnout, and I'll be the first to say, that is real. I've lived it. But even the kind comments from his friends couldn't erase the fact that he'd ignored governance while setting tables for men I keep seeing on sponsored podcasts telling me to optimize my morning. Then he sent an email to the investors proposing a Vision Reset Summit at a resort 2 hours away with breakout sessions. I almost RSVP'd breakout of what exactly, but Ms. Ferguson raised an eyebrow in an email that said simply, let's not. While he was trying to stage a summit, we were staging a pantry pop-up in the parking lot with the food bank. The mayor came to cut a ribbon we didn't have and held scissors in the air anyway because he wanted the picture. We handed him a crate and told him to put his arms to work. We moved produce like a river. Rosa's daughter directed traffic like an air traffic controller. A woman with a baby in a carrier cried when she saw the soap and said, I thought it was just food. And Emma said, dignity isn't just...
The town was watching. Not like a scandal, like a sunrise. I kept expecting a shoe to drop and a headline to bite, but what came instead was an email from a culinary school asking if they could place externs with us. We saw your staff rep on your advisory board, the director wrote. Teach them that model. We said yes and made those kids a packet. How to talk to vendors without sounding like you're auditioning for a show about chefs. How to read a P&L without pretending. How to look a dishwasher in the eye and ask how their hands are. Mid-month, we held our first open books night for staff. We ordered pizza, I projected the P&L on the office TV like we were watching a game, and we walked through it line by line.
"See this?" I said, tapping comped meals. "This used to be a number with fog around it. The fog is gone. This is the weather." Heads nodded. Rosa asked a better question than some auditors I've worked with. "If breakage on glassware is high, can we buy sturdier glasses even if they aren't as pretty?" We did. The fancy stems are for anniversary tables. The workhorses are for Tuesday. Tuesday pays the light bill. At the same time, Ms. Ferguson and I were sketching the third part of the plan in pencil. Not an ESOP, that's expensive and huge, and we are neither big enough nor rich enough for that just yet. But a trust with a simple mission: put 20% of the restaurant's profits into employee ownership units over 5 years, governed by a charter that requires community dinners and transparent comp policy to stay in force. Call it the Community Table Trust. The units vest like a slow kettle boils. If the place sells, the staff do more than clap from the sidelines. If it thrives, they don't just get cake, they get the fork. We weren't ready to spring it. Structures like that need to be built like bridges, not tents. But beginning is its own kind of revenge. Quiet, relentless, all hinge. Around then, a new antagonist tried to enter stage left, a hospitality group from the next city over with a logo that looks like a razor blade sent a feeler through a broker. "We're interested in licensing your community table concept for a rollout," the email cooed. "Imagine doing well by doing good at scale." They offered consulting fees that would make a lesser woman lose her place in the Lord's Prayer. I wrote back, "Our concept is neighbors feeding neighbors. It cannot be franchised because it's a promise, not a product. If you want to do well by doing good, copy us and don't pay us. But you will need to post your books. That's the part everyone skips." They did not reply. Ashley, meanwhile, kept showing up. Not just for therapy, though she was clocking those hours like a woman who plans to graduate, but in tiny, domestic ways that mean more to me than any court ruling. She started leaving me voicemails that were just the sound of her car turning and her saying, "I'm okay." She stood by the dish pit after our rush and said to the kid there, "Thank you for making our plates exist." And he looked at her like she'd discovered water. She mailed Brian's suits to a consignment shop that pays you in checks, not store credit, and I took that as a sacrament. Still, nothing in life is a straight arrow. A blogger from out of town wrote a puffy piece about Grandma C's restaurant, and while the comments were mostly kind, a few of them made me want to send strangers to bed without dinner. "Let the founder," one said, and I didn't know if that was a pun or an instruction. Another said, "Boomers stealing from the young again," and I had half a mind to post our ages and our payroll side by side and say, "Sir, be serious." Marco forbade me from reading comments after 9 p.m. "Kitchen rule," he said. "No salt after 9. Your blood pressure can't take it." A week later, something useful came out of the internet noise. A woman named Dee Dee, who runs HR for a manufacturing plant across town, sent me a message. "We do a quiet bench in our break room. No phones. If someone's sitting there, you can join them, but only if you can be quiet and present. It has saved my sanity. You want the sign?" We wanted the sign. We installed a bench near the back door. The rule caught on overnight. You'd see a line cook and a server sitting shoulder to shoulder, saying nothing, staring at the street. 2 minutes, maybe 5, then back to the fire. It calmed the place like a deep breath. Halfway through the month, Brian signed his severance and his mutual non-disparagement. He chose a polite disappearing act. No posts, no speeches, no sit down with the lifestyle editor to perform contrition. He sent Ashley 3 texts with emojis that looked like they'd been through a war, and Emma one with "proud of you," which I appreciated even if it came late. He left town for what he called a reset, and I did not chase him. Not my job. My job was soup and schedules and the long math of building something that doesn't lean on any one person's charisma. And I know this part is hard to hear, but it's important. The truth was about to come out, and it was going to be glorious.
Ruthie, who can reconstruct a crime scene from a petty cash box, brought me a report one morning with a hum in her throat that meant both I fixed it and you need to sit down. It was the alumna of all her reconciliations. She'd mapped collab dinners, distributor allowances, influencer giveaways, and petty comps, and the picture it painted was what we suspected. Not theft, not fraud, not anything a DA would find worth a suit. Just ego expenses dressed as brand building. She'd also found something sweeter, a half-finished initiative in an old folder called Staff Gift. Someone, Marco, probably, had proposed an emergency fund 2 years ago that died in committee when committee meant Brian in a whiteboard. Ruthie revived it. We named it the Hands Fund. It's small, but real. If your transmission dies or your kid needs a prescription in the exact week the rent is due, you don't have to choose between car and coins, at least not while we've got breath. On a Wednesday night after service, we held a vote with the staff. Real vote. Paper slips, counting in the open. We asked, did they want to formalize a staff council with decision power over 3 things: schedule policy, comp policy, and any marketing that involved their faces? The motion carried with 2 abstentions because one of our teens said he didn't understand the comp policy yet, and Rosa's daughter, God bless her, said, then we'll teach you and vote again next quarter. That's governance, not glossy decks, not brand values in a font that costs more than a crew meal. Just people learning where the light switches are. A week later, I got a call from the city about a small business grant tied to workforce training. Honestly, the woman said, we were going to give it to a tech startup, but their deck had 12 pages about disrupting lunch, and I couldn't stop picturing a sandwich crying. We used the grant to buy knives that didn't wobble and to pay one of her aunties to run a paid workshop on how to have a hard conversation without burnout. We filmed her hands only, Emma's rule, while she wrote phrases on a whiteboard like, when you, I feel, I need, and I wrote next to it, smaller, be proud, not loud. And just when he thought he had me backed into a corner, he forgot who he was dealing with. Stick with me because you'll want to see how this plays out. The big shoe, because there's always a big one, fell in late January in the form of a glossy envelope from a legal department at a national chain with a name that rhymes with harbor but is not Hearth and Harbor. They claimed our registered community table service mark would cause marketplace confusion with their philanthropic nights called community table, which, as it turns out, they hadn't actually registered. They were using the TM like a scarecrow. Miss Ferguson smiled like a woman who keeps salt in her purse. We sent back a letter, courteous and crisp, with our USPTO filing, use in commerce, and a short history of the term in our town's newspaper dating back to 1987 when the church hall called their potlucks community tables. We were not going to war. God knows I have no interest in spending the rest of my 60s in depositions, but we weren't going to be bullied by folks who think good deeds are a marketing channel. A week later, the chain's council sent a mutual coexistence agreement that gave us our lane in writing. I signed it with a pen that squeaks because those feel more official. While legal paper fluttered, the real paper that mattered landed with a quiet thud. Appraisals and draft bylaws for the Community Table Trust. We convened the members, the staff reps, and Mr. Lake's old lawyer, who, even retired, insists on sitting in meetings to make sure you all don't agree too fast. The plan, starting in March, 5% of monthly profits flow into staff units. If we hit quarterly targets, labor at X, food cost at Y, comp at Z, and community dinner hours delivered on schedule, an extra kicker adds 2%. The units vest over 5 years. If you leave before the vest, your unvested portion goes back in the pot. Your vested portion pays out at book value, not a fairy tale valuation that requires a ring light to justify. It's simple on purpose because the complicated part isn't the math. It's teaching ourselves that ownership isn't magic. It's chores. We didn't tell the town yet, not because we're coy, but because I refuse to turn staff ownership into a ribbon cutting.
It's for them, not for the camera. We would make a little announcement when it was real and in force, not a single second before. On a soft Sunday, we hosted Sunday leftovers at the church hall. Free plates, plastic forks, and stories. A man sat alone with a plate balanced on his knee, and I recognized him as a quiet regular who always sat at the bar and ordered exactly one beer and the cheapest appetizer. I sat down next to him with my coffee. "You all saved me last month," he said, eyes on the wall. "I was going to sell my tools. The pantry and the hands fund? I kept the tools. I fixed 2 doors. I paid rent." He didn't look at me when he said it, and I didn't make him. We just sat. Quiet bench rules, even at a church table.
After, I went home and pulled Tom's letter out again because I needed a hit of him. He had drawn a little turkey in the margin with a hat. "If they forget you," he'd written, "make memory a table other people can sit at." I kissed the paper like a fool and stuck it back under the tab. The last week of January brought rain that made the sidewalk steamy and my shoes squeak in the kitchen. It also brought a call from the culinary school. Would you teach a night class? I said yes before thinking, then panicked for the rest of the day like a teenager who signed up for an AP class because her best friend dared her. We called it Hospitality Math for Humans. Emma designed a flyer with my face drawn as a line art so no one had to see my pores. 20 people signed up. They were cooks, servers, a daycare worker saving for a food truck, a man who runs the deli counter at the market who said, "I know how to slice, I want to know how to last." We held class at 8:30 after close. I wrote on a whiteboard so old it remembered a different mayor. Revenue is applause, profit is the mortgage. We talked about comp policy and vendor relationships and how to read a bank statement without pretending the credits column is what you're allowed to spend. I handed out laminated sheets that said, "Ask 3 times. Is it nice? Is it necessary? Is it paid for?" One of the kids took a picture of his laminated sheet, put it as his phone background, and the next night at Expo, I saw him look at his lock screen before sending out a plate, and I wanted to cry for the 100th time this month, but in a good way again. He was about to get exactly what he deserved, and I had a front row seat. Don't go anywhere, because the final twist was getting closer. In February, we'd have our first members meeting with the trust on the agenda. The building sale would record on the county site, which meant anyone with a browser and an attitude could see my name on the deed. The coexistence agreement with the chain would hit the USPTO file, and the gossip columns might try to make me David with the slingshot. And most importantly, the clause in Tom's letter, employee ownership sweetheart, would go from a hope to a draft to a vote. But before any of that, one last reckoning rolled back into town in a rental car. Brian. He did the thing men do when they've been to therapy for 3 weeks and think they invented self-awareness. He texted 3 pronouncements. "I've done a lot of work. I'm writing. I'm okay seeing you if you're open to it." Then he showed up at the restaurant before his reservation with a bouquet of white lilies, which I promptly sent to the bar because I do not need funeral flowers in my lobby on a Friday. He took the table by the window he used to call the investor table, sat with 2 men I didn't know, and ordered the chicken, which made me hopeful because if you're trying to make amends, you order the non-showy thing and you eat it. Dinner went smooth. He paid. He tipped 25%, which Rosa rolled her eyes at because she refuses to let tips be a parade float. But I saw the server put a hand on her own chest after she walked away, and I am not above appreciating a gesture. On his way out, he stopped at the host stand where Emma stood like a lighthouse. He said, "Proud of you, again. Voice real." She nodded. "Thanks," she said. "We saved you a slice of lemon thing." He smiled like he'd been given a second-place ribbon that still meant something. He turned to me. "Can we talk?" I said, "In the morning. After coffee. I'm kinder then." We met at 9, public, at the coffee shop with the macrame and the plants that look like they know secrets. He apologized without adjectives. He said he was going to visit his mother and stay a while, figure out work that doesn't make him perform being a person while forgetting to be one. He asked if he could volunteer at the pantry while he was in town. No photos, no posts. I said yes, but remember that volunteering is a job. You show up or you don't. There's no credit for almost. He nodded like someone had finally told him the speed limit.
Then he said something that made me put my cup down. I heard a rumor you bought the building. I held his eyes. We did, on terms that made sense for the restaurant. He swallowed. I heard a rumor you're giving the staff ownership. I smiled. We are doing math. He looked down. I wish I'd done that. I said, so do I, and I meant it in the kindest possible way, instead of the show. He left town that afternoon. Ashley did not. She stayed, she worked, she took the microphone off. People asked about a divorce and I told them, not your business and not mine either. What is my business is making sure that the staff come in at 4, their schedules are posted, and the knives are sharp, and the quiet bench is free.
The week ended with a surprise the universe wrapped in brown paper. A handwritten thank you note from Mr. Lake, postmarked from Florida. Linda, collards an A+, send recipe, it said. P.S. Proud of you. I put it in the blue folder under Tom's letter because sometimes you need a chorus. We were almost ready. The vote, the paperwork, the reveal that would turn my husband's margin note into a business model. The revenge wasn't the spectacle. We'd already done the only spectacle I intend to do with a stock pot and a shoebox. The revenge was endurance. It was ownership where ownership belongs. It was walking into a room where I was once a prop on someone else's highlight reel and becoming the stagehand who knows where the fuse box is. I could feel the last act cue up like a song. If you've ever sung alto in a church choir, you know the sensation. The line underneath that holds when the melody pretends it's the hero. That was me. Alto, line, holding. February came in with the sound the old furnace makes when it wakes up, reluctant, then committed. I marked days on the wall calendar with a fat green pen like I was back at the branch closing out a quarter. Vendor check-ins on Mondays, training on Tuesdays, open books Wednesdays, and the members meeting tagged with a little star and the words, bring cookies, and you're spying. Word got out about the deed before I prepared my speech. County records posted it, and by dinner time 3 people had texted me screenshots with my name circled, like I'd been voted most likely to buy a building in the yearbook. The local gossip blog slapped up a post titled, Grandma Owns the Block, which I found funny, until I didn't. I brewed coffee, wrote a note to the staff. The walls are ours now, that means roofs too. If you see a leak, tell us before it introduces itself. And sat down to craft something for the town. No manifesto, just a letter card-stocked on the host stand. We bought the building to keep the rent honest and the tables steady. This isn't a takeover. It's a promise. We'll keep cooking, we'll keep the collards, we'll keep the door open. Marco stuck it in the window next to Welcome Home and a tiny picture of Rosa's daughter holding a stack of menus half her size. People stopped and put their hands on the glass like we'd hung up a sonogram. The first week I ran on adrenaline and cinnamon gum. We were tight on payroll because January always is, even with soup and common sense comps. The Hands Fund replaced a tire and bought antibiotics. The Harbor Pot caught its first small pour. 5% of profits isn't a waterfall, it's a steady drip. And I caught Rosa touching the line in QuickBooks like it was a rosary. It's real, she asked. It gets more real every month, I said. Open Books Night became my favorite standing date. We ordered 2 sheet pizzas and a salad for penance, and I projected the P&L. Staff asked better questions each week. Emma and Louise took turns translating in Spanish, so no one had to pretend. Labor at 28.7%, I said one Wednesday, circling the number. Gold Star Week. Food at 29.5, good, but watch the waste. Comp at 2.4. We will keep it under 3. We do not comp vibes. Vibes are free. Someone snorted. Rosa put her hand up. Breakage down, she said, proud, because we said, if it's too pretty to hold, it's too pretty to wash. We planned Valentine's the way we plan everything now. Start with people, add food. We called it Table for Whoever, and I expected a trickle of the recently divorced and the chronically single. Instead, we got 3 busloads of widowers from the VFW, a knitting circle in matching sweaters that said yarn over, and 2 teen friends who arrived in thrift dresses and fake pearls and ate chocolate mousse like it was paying them. Somewhere between the second round of heart-shaped rolls and the third song from the jazz duo that lives to make me weep, a man in his 70s stood up, cleared his throat, and proposed to the woman he had been courting since 1968. She said yes, the room cheered, and a server dropped a tray in the kitchen and cried, because that's what happens when joy is thick in the air. And just when he thought he could rewrite the ending with a caption, he forgot I still had the master copy. Stick with me, because you'll want to see how this plays out. While love was making fools of us, a different set of fools tried me.
The Razorblade Hospitality Group sent someone to observe on a Friday night, a woman in a blazer sharp enough to Juliana Carrot. She sat at the bar and asked too many questions you only ask if you're an investor or a thief. Labor percentages, line cook wages, whether staff are amenable to activations. Emma texted me from 4 feet away, spy at bar emoji, because even my social media granddaughter knows an activation is often code for, we want your soul for a tote bag. I poured the woman a glass of water on the house and gave her my best bank manager smile. I don't license promises, I said soft. We write them down and keep them.
Take the week, I said. Write 2 lists, what you want to run from, what you want to run toward. If the first list is longer, don't go. If the second one sings, I'll help you pack a box. He looked like I'd handed him the answer to a riddle. He came back in 2 days with a napkin that said, toward, stability, teaching, staff ownership, collards. He stayed. We gave him a formal title, Executive Chef Operating Partner, and a chair on the advisory council with a real vote. He asked for one more thing. Can we put a line on the menu that says, made by hands that are paid, trained, and heard? Yes, we can. Yes, we did. The night before the trust vote, I made lemon bars because I am exactly that kind of woman. I couldn't sleep and ended up sorting the piles in my blue folder like a raccoon with a jewelry box. Deed, management agreement, coexistence letter from the chain with the scarecrow, bank letter, and the thing I hadn't told anyone about yet. That last paper wasn't law. It wasn't leverage. It was a promise written in Tom's slanted hand and notarized because we're those people. If this ever becomes yours to decide, put it in their hands. You're happiest when somebody else is eating. I tucked it back under the tab. I wasn't ready to say it out loud. Not yet. The vote day smelled like rain and garlic. We packed the dining room with staff, investors, a couple of aunties who came to watch democracy because it's better than television, and Miss Ferguson with her binders like armor. We distributed paper ballots like the second grade, because checking a box with a pencil makes you think for half a second longer than clicking a button does. I watched people make faces. Serious, hopeful, nervous. Rosa took her time. Louis chewed the end of his pencil like the fate of his transmission depended on it, which, in a long way, it might. We counted in the open, old school, 1, 2, 3. The trust passed by a wide margin. The 2 no votes were honest men who said later they didn't understand trusts, and they had been burned before by people who called a thing for the staff and used it for a press release. You'll trust it when you see it, I said, and shook their hands like they were my bosses, because they are. Applause rolled across the room like weather. Someone cried, someone whistled. I passed out lemon bars and said, this doesn't change the floor you just mopped. It changes the feeling when you wake up and your feet hit it. At the back of the room, a man cleared his throat. For a second, I thought it would be Brian with a dramatic objection, because those are the lies your brain tells you when you've lived too long in other people's weather. It wasn't. It was Mr. Lake's lawyer, the retired one, standing to say you did good, which is the highest mark a man like that gives. After, a kid from the culinary school asked if he could take a picture with me, and I agreed on one condition. Get my hands, not my face. These are the interesting part. He did. Emma posted it with a caption that said, hands that count count, which is grammatically shaky and spiritually sound. 2 days later, the coexistence agreement with the national chain, posted to the database, and the blog made it into David versus Goliath, because of course it did. I didn't read the comments. Marco sat on my hands like a mother cat. The same day, a small envelope arrived at the restaurant addressed to the woman with the folder. Inside was a gift card to the hardware store and a note in scrawl, for nails, because you built a table. I stuck it in the blue folder, which by now barely closes. February slid toward March, like a plate sliding down the pass, and we got into the rhythm of a place that can breathe. The quiet bench saw more traffic than the bar some nights. Emma started a bulletin board by the staff bathroom with notes that said, Swap Wednesday, and I can cover your host shift if you help me with my taxes. And my favorite, you are not your worst table,
On the service side, the gravy got thicker, the chicken crisper, the green beans less squeaky. We will feed you, we were saying, with every plate, with more than our food. And I know this part is hard to hear, but it's important. The truth was about to come out, and it was going to be glorious, because the blue folder still had one more reveal, and the right moment was approaching like a train. You can hear before you see. The management agreement had stabilized the ship. The deed had anchored it. The trust had put hands on the wheel that weren't mine. The last thing, the thing that Tom had made me promise on a Sunday afternoon, when the house smelled like lemon oil and the Panthers were losing, was bolder than any of that, and cleaner. I wasn't going to keep the majority I'd wrestled back from chaos. I'd saved it. I was about to give it away.
Not to a hedge fund, not to a brand, not to a man with a dimple who thinks followers buy flour. To the people who mop and chop and count and carry. To Rosa, to Luis, to the kid from down the block who learned to hold a knife like it's a tool, not a weapon. To Emma, if she wanted to stay in this work that is somehow both old as bread and new as every day. But if years in a bank taught me anything, it's that even generosity needs procedure. You don't fling equity like Mardi Gras beads. You make a plan, you check it twice, and you tell the story in a way that doesn't make anyone feel small. So I called a meeting for the first week of March. I booked the church hall because I wanted wooden chairs and a crucifix watching us behave. I asked Miss Ferguson to bring her nice pen. I asked Marco to make a pot of chili and a vegetarian version that somehow tasted like forgiveness. I wrote out the bones of a speech on an index card, because if I bring a page, I'll read it and forget to look anyone in the eye. The night before the meeting, Ashley came over with lilies. For Valentine's, she said. Late but sweet, and I set them on the porch because I'm not above superstition. She looked at the blue folder like it might sprout legs. "Are you nervous?" she asked. "I'm excited," I said, and it was true. I'm about to do the thing Tom asked me to do. Took me long enough. She squeezed my hand. He'd be proud in that way that made you roll your eyes and secretly love it. "Yes," I said, and I could feel him in the room like a draft, the good kind that reminds you you're alive. Morning came. I put on the red cardigan because at this point it's part of the uniform. I tucked Tom's letter into the folder. I drove to the church with pies in the trunk and my heart pounding like a casserole dish on a table full of relatives. The hall filled. Staff, investors, aunties, Deshawn in a suit with a tie that looked like a stripe of hope. Even the mayor slipped in and sat in the back with his hat in his lap like a boy at his first communion. I walked to the front, laid the folder on the table, and looked at them, all of them, the people who had been my shock and my salve, the people who made my late husband's words not just a memory, but a map. I took out the index card, I took a breath. He was about to get exactly what he deserved, and I had a front row seat. Don't go anywhere. The church hall smelled like Murphy oil soap and coffee strong enough to take the paint off a boat. We put out metal chairs, the clanky kind that make even confident people sit gentler. And Marco parked 2 stock pots on a table like altars, chili and the vegetarian version that tastes like you forgave your neighbor. Miss Ferguson arrived with her binder suitcase and that lemon face she gets when she's about to watch decent people do a brave thing. Deshawn from the bank came in a suit with a tie the color of a sunrise you'd pull over for. Staff filed in wearing hoodies and hope. Investors took seats along the wall, sweater vests at attention. Auntie sat in the back row knitting because even governance deserves a scarf. I set my blue folder on the folding table with the cautious reverence of a woman lowering a baby into a crib. Inside, the deed, the management agreement, the coexistence letter from the big chain with the scarecrow TM, the bank's comfort letter, the trust draft, and Tom's letter, the margin note from the dead that had been rattling around in my purse like a coin I was afraid to spend. I didn't bring a speech, just an index card with "Tell the Truth" written in my own shaky hand. I said, "Thank you for coming,"
and the hall got quiet the way a living room gets quiet when the good part of a movie starts. When my husband got sick, we started writing the kind of paperwork everybody swears they'll get to after the holidays. The no-show, no-dough clause was for us. Silly until it wasn't. It was a promise we made to each other to show up for each other. Last Thanksgiving, I watched my family toast to family from the wrong table. I could have sunk into a chair and grown moss. Instead, I opened my blue folder. Half the room smiled because they'd already heard the story in pieces. The side letter, owner's night, the dinner that fed a town on the same night my turkey went cold, the comp policy, the bank letter, the management vote under glass while the bread cooled, the building deed, the service mark no one owns in their heart, but we registered so no one could hijack our potluck for clicks. And now, I said, we're here to make the last move Tom asked me to make. The one my bones were slow to sign, because when you've rescued a thing from a ditch, it's hard to hand the steering wheel to someone who didn't put on the boots that day.
Marco's eyes found mine like a steadying hand on a back. Rosa mouthed, "You can." The Community Table Trust passes profits to staff over time. You voted for that. Today, I'm proposing we also transfer majority ownership of the operating company to the trust. 51%, vesting in stages over 3 years, with a mission lock so ironclad it would make my high school civics teacher cry. I lifted a sheet. The lock is simple. The restaurant must always post its comp policy, hold community dinners a set number of hours per quarter, offer open book nights, and maintain staff seats on the advisory board. Those planks can't be scrapped unless 2/3 of unit holders and 2/3 of members say so in the same room at the same time with pens that work. A ripple moved through the room like someone had opened a door onto good air. The sweater vest investor raised a hand. You'd be giving up the majority you just fought for? I'm not giving it up, I'm giving it to the people who mop and chop and make the lights come on because they showed up. I will keep a small class of shares, the golden ladle, the room laughed, it felt good, with exactly 3 vetoes. No sale to an entity that won't honor the mission lock, no payday that guts payroll, and no rebrand that removes the words Hearth and Harbor from the front window while I'm still alive to press my hand against it. I don't want control. I want guardrails. Deshaun folded his hands like a man hearing the bridge hold. He said, "From a bank perspective, long-term stability beats short-term sizzle. Staff ownership, when it's real and not a shirt, makes people treat dishwashers like electricians and line cooks like pilots. That keeps the loan boring." He smiled. "We love boring loans." An investor at the edge, a woman with a bob so straight it could slice celery, said carefully, "What about value?" "Value is heat that stays, not fireworks," I said. "If you want a multiple that makes your heart race, I can't help you. If you want to know a dining room you care about will be here in 10 years, paying people who can afford sneakers and rent, that I can do. And if we ever sell, staff are paid at book value first. Investors still get their distribution. It's cleaner than a TED Talk." Emma raised her hand like she was back in 10th grade. "Can I say something?" She didn't wait. "My generation thinks ownership is for people with ring lights or cat tables. I didn't know it could smell like garlic and sound like Rosa telling me to stop apologizing for existing. I want to work here and own a little chunk of what my hands do. I want the kids I went to school with to hear that sentence and know it's possible without a hoodie brand and 6 hype videos." The aunties clapped. Marco swallowed hard and pretended to cough. And just when he thought he could rewrite the ending with a caption, I said almost to myself, he forgot I still had the master copy. We're not building a redemption arc to trend on a Thursday. We're building something boring and beautiful enough to survive all our egos. Miss Ferguson set her binder on the table like a gavel. "We have a resolution," she said. "We'll distribute ballots. Majority of members and a simple majority of staff unit holders present must vote yes. If it passes, transfer begins on the 1st of the month." We passed out paper and pencils. No phones, no clicking. People bent their heads like prayer. We counted out loud, the way trust requires. 1, 2, 3. The yeses stacked like plates after a feast.
It passed with only a handful of no's. Honest ones, the sort that keep the room from turning into a pep rally. I breathed out so deeply my ribcage popped like a jar. There was clapping, then hugging, then chilly because big decisions make people hungry. Rosa brought me a bowl and touched my shoulder with the gravity of a knighting. Family, for real. Afterwards, in the quiet that comes when chairs get stacked and coffee urns are rinsed, I stayed in the hall with Miss Ferguson and the blue folder. "You're sure?" she asked, the way good lawyers are trained to do. "I'm sure. I didn't save this to admire it. I saved it to give it a future." She slid over signature tabs like tickets at a raffle. I signed my name until it looked like someone else's. We notarized. We hugged like women who know paperwork is a love language in our household. The consequences of all that ink arrived on their own schedule, like weather. The staff stood taller. Not like peacocks, like people whose shoes fit. Marco started a weekly 5-minute numbers at the past talk that was half pep talk, half math. The kid from the culinary school learned to say, "We're 86ing tiramisu because dairy came in hot and we don't gamble." And he said it without apology, because owners don't apologize for telling the truth about safety.
Outside the building, the town acted like itself, nosy and kind. The lifestyle editor wrote a column titled "Ownership is a Verb," and misnamed me Lydia again, which at this point feels like an inside joke between me and God. The mayor stopped by with a framed proclamation that called me an exemplar of matriarchal governance, which is a phrase I plan to stitch on a pillow and give to Ms. Ferguson. A woman I didn't know left a bouquet on the host stand with a note, "Thank you for not selling the place where my father and I eat and pretend we don't miss Mom." We put the flowers by the quiet bench. And just when he thought he had me backed into a corner, he forgot who he was dealing with. Stick with me, because you'll want to see how this plays out. Brian, for the record, did not show up with a boombox and an apology speech. He sent a short note through Ms. Ferguson, acknowledging the transfer and our coexistence agreement, cashing his severance, and affirming he would not use the Hearth and Harbor name to spin up a podcast or supper club or anything that could be mistaken for an official event. He stayed gone, which is a kind of integrity when you have a face that used to open doors and now opens conversations no one wants to have. A vendor told me, quietly, that the compliance review barred him from certain allowance programs for a year. That's a business consequence, not a stoning. I wish him well, the way you wish a storm to go nourish a field far from your house. Ashley? She surprised me. She didn't announce a divorce. She didn't post a sunrise from a beach with a caption about new chapters, because we don't write our lives in fonts anymore. She got a small apartment with a lease in her name. She paid it on the 1st and texted me, "I love my quiet." She came to family meal and ate at the staff table, not the manager's. She learned to pull the espresso shots when we're slammed, and she is terrible at it, bless, but improving. She and Brian are gentle with each other on the phone. I hear her say "we" much less, and "I" much more. That's not revenge. That's repair. Emma enrolled in the community college hospitality program and kept running our host stand like an air traffic controller who also knows where the back door hides the good broom. Her hands videos shifted from "look at this romantic steam" to "here's how to portion without rage." Her captions say things like, "Someone fed me and paid me today. I'll be back." A nice boy from the line asked her to movies, and she said yes, but made him sign up for 2 pantry shifts first. I bought him good socks for Christmas. He doesn't know it was me. At home, I took down the ironed tablecloth from where it had been hanging on a chair back like a ghost of last November. I washed it, pressed it, and folded it into the armoire with my church napkins and the wool blanket that still smells like a campfire from 1998. I wrote, "Thanksgiving, phones in basket," in my wall calendar, because some traditions need guardrails too. Danny booked flights early enough to beat blizzards. We set a place for whoever needs one.
I will cook the turkey again, but I am not cooking a holiday for people who arrive by live stream. That's a different feast entirely. Where's the shock, you're asking? Because you've been told there's one more twist. Here it is, neat as a bow and twice as useful. The no-show, no-dough clause had a second paragraph almost no one remembers because the first one made everybody giggle. It said, if the family missed Thanksgiving without documented cause 3 times in 5 years, the discretionary family fund doesn't just redirect that year's distribution, it sunsets permanently. The capital moves to the Community Table Trust as a seed for education and emergency needs. When I told Ashley, she sat very still and then nodded. That's fair, she said. We weren't a family that year. Money should follow truth. I filed the sunset letter. The fund moved. We didn't post about it. We simply started an education stipend for any staffer who wanted to take a class or get a certification, food safety, GED, driver's ed. Rosa signed up for small business accounting for non-scary people. Luis took Auto Tech 101 at night, so the next time his transmission hiccups, he can swear at it accurately. The dishwasher with the quiet eyes started ESL on Tuesdays and told me shyly that he wanted to be the one to answer the phone when the health inspector calls. That money? The family money? It looks better in their hands than it ever did in a savings account, earning polite interest. That's the revenge. Watching value live where it feeds someone, instead of where it flatters a statement.
One more practical flourish, because you know me by now. I put the building into a land trust structure with a very boring name and a very sharp purpose. I kept a life estate, my house key level of control while I'm alive, and named the Community Table Trust as the remainder beneficiary. When I go, the building does not go to whoever can make the biggest speech. It goes to the table. Miss Ferguson made me sign it 3 times because my hand was shaking. Then we ate lemon bars in her office, while her dog stared at me like I was made of bacon. We didn't tell the town. You don't announce your will like a product launch. But I told Emma and Danny and Ashley around my kitchen table, with the cat pretending to be indifferent. Ashley cried. Not a garden-watering cry, just 3 neat sobs, and said, "You're the bravest person I know." I said, "No, baby, I just read the fine print." And just when anyone watching from the cheap seats might have thought the show was over, the universe handed us a curtain call. A letter from the culinary school. "Your night class has a waiting list. Would you teach a second section?" I said yes, and wrote on the board in big block letters, "Governance is love with spreadsheets." Kids laughed. Marco rolled his eyes and then took a picture. The restaurant settled into its new bones. The quiet bench got worn shiny. The jar on the shelf was still a jar, but the number in the books next to Harbor Pot started to look like something wider than luck. Everything we did got a little more boring, which is my favorite compliment in a world that thinks drama is proof of life. The last bit of consequence for Brian arrived as a postcard from far away, a small town where he's helping his mother set up a church kitchen rota for seniors who don't drive anymore. "It feels good," he wrote on the back of a picture of a gazebo. "No cameras. I'm learning to make soup." I put it in the blue folder behind Tom's letter. Maybe that's redemption. Maybe it's just a man making dinner. Either one will do. I know what some of you want. Fireworks. You want me to walk into the restaurant in a red suit with a soundtrack and declare victory. Honey, victory is 8 hours of dining room where nobody cries in the walk-in, a P&L that doesn't lie, a dishwasher that gets repaired before it becomes everybody's problem, and a staff meeting where the quietest person asks a question and the loudest one shuts up to hear the answer. My revenge was a ledger. My weapon, a side letter and a blue folder. My victory lap is Rosa's daughter in a cap and gown next June with a little scholarship from a fund called No Show, No Dough that bought her books without the sting of charity. It's Ashley's key on a lanyard, and her text that says, "I made soup tonight, no pictures." It's Emma's caption. "Someone gave me a share, I gave a shift to a kid who needed to study, we both won." Thanksgiving will roll around again, and I will rub the turkey with butter and sage at 6 in the morning because I am still me, and the house will still creak after midnight, and I will still wear Tom's flannel when it does. We'll put the phones in a basket by the door. We'll set a place for anyone who needs one. If they miss it, the table won't disappear. It will simply be there for somebody else. That's the point. That's the plan. He was about to get exactly what he deserved, and I had a front row seat. Don't go anywhere. Spring arrived one wet morning while I was labeling quart containers and listening to the roof tick like it was shrugging winter off its shoulders. I wrote March on the walking calendar like a teacher starting a new unit and felt the click that means we've crossed from triage to routine. Routine looks like Emma hanging the phones in basket sign without rolling her eyes. It looks like Rosa smacking my hand away from the knife because she doesn't want to fish my thumb out of the romaine. It looks like Louis pointing at the quiet dishwasher and saying, he's quicker than me now, and not sounding threatened, sounding proud. The Community Table Trust went live on the 1st with all the ceremony of a coffee maker starting its day. No trumpets, just a red light and a steady drip. Ruthie posted the new line in QuickBooks and printed the report in 12-point font because she said, dignity. We added a tiny ritual at family meal. After we bless the hands, yes, even the atheists like Rosa's cousins smirk and then cross themselves when they think no one is looking, someone reads aloud the week's numbers as if they are weather. Labor, 28.4. Food, 29.9. Comps, 2.1. No one cheers because it's not shareable. It's knowable. Then we pass the beans. A week in, the first profit share deposit hit the staff accounts. It wasn't a parade, but it was shoes. Rosa texted me a photo of her daughter's sneakers in a box with tissue paper. She cried, the text said. I sat down on a milk crate in the walk-in and cried too, which made Emma laugh and say, Nana, the lettuce is going to absorb your feelings.
We started a tradition I should have invented when I was 30. Back of house awards. Laminated certificates the aunties hand out on the last Wednesday of every month. Best knife roll. Quietest hero. Most improved towel fold. Emma won that one to her theatrical dismay. We clap loudly, we keep the speeches short, we cut cake with a knife that isn't supposed to be used for cake and do it anyway because sometimes anarchy is part of morale. By mid-March, routine had teeth. The city emailed about a surprise health inspection. God bless them, as if any inspection is a surprise when you run a place clean. The inspector came in with a clipboard and a face like a librarian who can sense lies. She looked, she prodded, she wrote. She knocked on a shelf and listened like a doctor. You're dulling your knives on this board, she said to a teenager, who nodded solemnly and swapped boards like a magician. She pointed at a mop bucket and I moved it before she finished pointing. She jotted a note about a loose gasket on the lowboy. We called the repair guy before she reached the front door. She left with a 98 and a card that said, "Thanks for not acting like this was a performance." I stuck the card in the blue folder. It's beginning to look like a scrapbook of boring victories. And just when he thought the story would sag without drama, he forgot that steady is the twist no one sees coming. Stick with me because you'll want to see how this plays out. The first wobble of spring came the way wobble usually does, through a back channel and with too many emojis. A food blogger from 2 counties over posted a video titled Grandma Coo with my photo from the paper, mislabeled Lydia, bless, and captions like, "Did she go too far?" The comments section did its carnival. I almost took my red cardigan off and drove to set the man's algorithm on fire, but Marco stood in the doorway and said, "You told me once that the opposite of performance is service. We got tickets, let's plate." So we plated. The tickets didn't care what the internet said. The collards wilted like they always do, beautifully. After close, we wiped the counters and I wrote, "Do not feed trolls, feed neighbors," on a post-it and stuck it above the schedule. The USPTO examiner sent us another question about the community table service mark, and Ms. Ferguson fired back with citations that made me feel like we'd brought a librarian to a knife fight.
The chain with the scarecrow, tag mark, signed the coexistence agreement on a Thursday after 3 pointless edits and one real one that said, in effect, "We won't use your name for events where you collect funds for your staff. You won't use our stylized logo on anything with a knife. Fine by me. I don't need anyone's tag mark to serve stew." We kept adding small hinges that swing big doors. Emma launched Hands Up School, free morning mini lessons for anyone who wants to work their first restaurant job without crying in the walk-in. We teach how to carry 3 plates, how to say, "I'll check on that" in Spanish, how to fold a towel into a triangle that is not a weapon. The aunties handle pretend customers, and they are terrifying. One of them plays man who thinks he invented bread. The new host survived him. We clapped. Rosa asked for a spreadsheet she could understand without a calculator. We built it on a single page with colors. "That's all I ever wanted," she said, and patted my cheek like I had remembered to drink water. The dishwasher asked for a better mat because his back hurt. We bought 2. After we rolled them out, he stood on the new one and said quietly, "Feels like the floor loves me." In April, we did our first community tax night at the church hall. No judgments, just folding chairs and a volunteer EA who can make 1099s less of a threat. Half the town showed up with shoeboxes. We brewed coffee and told folks, it's not shameful to be confused. We got through it. People hugged volunteers like they'd performed a rescue. And just when he thought he'd catch me grandstanding, he forgot I prefer a ledger to a microphone. Stick with me because you'll want to see how this plays out. The bigger surprise landed on a Tuesday, like a cat that jumps onto your lap without asking. The state's Small is Mighty grant program emailed to say we'd been selected for a pilot program on employee ownership support. We don't usually do restaurants because restaurants are chaotic. Yours appears to be less so. Attached a modest sum for legal fees and training, and a requirement to present our learnings at a regional summit with a name that sounds like a multivitamin. I agreed with one condition: staff present with me. We don't do Nana as hero, I wrote back. They said yes.
The week before the summit, I practiced my slides to the staff. Slide 1, a picture of hands with flour. Slide 2, revenue is applause. Profit is the mortgage. Slide 3, our 3 locks. Comp policy on the wall, open books nights, community hours. Slide 4, we didn't seize power. We restored stewardship. We argued over a bullet point about tip pooling until we could all say it without a hedge. Then I changed the font from something pretty to something legible, because my eyes are not what they were. We went. The summit was a ballroom with a projector and coffee that tasted like hot paper. I stood between Marco and Rosa. I spoke in the voice I use at church when I read Psalms. We made it boring, I said. We made it kind. Then we wrote it down. Rosa took the mic and said, "We stop comping influencers. We start comping single moms." And the room shifted. Marco talked about menu costs with the romance of a man describing a first date. People lined up afterward and asked questions that started with, "But what about?" And we answered them one by one like we answer tickets. A woman from a factory said, "We can't feed people, but we can post our comp policy equivalent." And I said, "Yes, ma'am, that's the point." We came home to spring break, and more teenagers than knives. Emma paired each newbie with an auntie like a buddy system. 0 fingers were lost. 1 ego was. He found it later, near the mop closet. The staff council voted to start a micro-library on site. Cookbooks, sobriety memoirs, a binder of what to do when your boss is you, which is what we call the section on self-management. I donated Tom's joy of cooking with his notes in the margin. Add a scandalous amount of butter. Don't apologize. They'll eat it. Then, because life likes symmetry, the landlord of the little storefront next to us called to say the tenant was moving to be near her grandbaby, and would we like first dibs? For what? I asked. Not a second dining room. I've learned that lesson in my bones. Marco said, what about a pantry or a daytime bakery that pays for itself on coffee? Emma said, what about a service classroom? Rosa said laundry. She won. We knocked a doorway through. We installed washers, dryers, a real staff locker room, and a tiny corner with a soft chair and a lamp where you can sit and cry for 40 seconds without the grill watching you. We posted a schedule. Free staff laundry hours on Mondays, pay what you can community hours on Tuesdays.
People brought quarters and stories. It smelled like clean cotton and relief. May sneaked in with strawberries. Emma started a strawberry stories board. Write something sweet you survived, stick it up with a pushpin, get a biscuit with jam. The board filled. Survived my first Mother's Day service. Survived quitting cigarettes. Survived telling my landlord no. Survived making matzo ball soup without Nana. That last one made me stare at the ceiling and say, "Okay, Tom, fine, I'll cry." We built a summer plan. Close 1 week in July for maintenance and rest, because burnout is not a Steph virtue. The aunties cackled and said, "We'll go to the beach and make you all wear sunscreen by text." We scheduled training for new fall externs. We slotted in a "what happens if Nana gets hit by a bus" tabletop exercise, and everyone told me not to call it that, so we renamed it "If Linda Takes a Vacation," which is funnier if you know me. Marco and Rosa ran it. The restaurant did not fall apart. My heart unclenched an inch. And just when you thought the only ending worth watching was fireworks, you forgot I come from potlucks that outlast the music. Stick with me, because you'll want to see how this plays out. Summer gave us one real test, a power outage on the hottest Saturday of the month, 5 hours before a wedding buyout. The transformer blew like a grudge. We stood in the kitchen with the lights off and did the math. Fridges, closed, safe for now. Freezers, don't open. Prep, doable with windows. The couple? Nervous as newborn deer. We rolled the event to Sunday afternoon with a discount and a promise. The groom cried and tried to hug me. I let him. Rosa's daughter called her cousin who works at the utility, and he moved us up one slot because I like their collards, which isn't corruption so much as community. The lights came back at 9 p.m. We clapped for the grid. The next day's wedding was beautiful in the way you can only get when people feel delivered. The bride's father put 100 on the pass with a note, "For whoever saved my daughter from a breakdown." I split it into 5s and gave it to the dishwashers, because I'm not a monster.
The summer also brought a letter we'd been waiting on. The USPTO approved our community table service mark. Miss Ferguson brought over bubbles, ginger ale, because neither of us needs to get sloppy, and we cheersed in my kitchen. "This is not about owning a phrase," I said. "It's about keeping it out of the hands of people who would use it to sell tote bags." She said bless, which is lawyer for amen. Ashley found a groove that didn't require a soundtrack. She got a tiny garden plot and brought in cherry tomatoes that tasted like sun and victory. She and Brian remained gentle, then less so, then honest. Papers got signed without a fight. It turns out a marriage can end without a war if both parties agree that peace is what happens when you stop pretending the weather is one man's mood. She kept her apartment. He kept his mother's house as a landing place. They kept Emma. We divided holidays like adults who remembered they were raised by people who believed in civility. It turns out you can write a civilized sentence in a divorce decree if the people signing it learn to talk without a ring light. Emma dated the line cook for a while, and then they didn't. And no one flounced or smashed a ramekin. They still worked the same shift and said behind, without malice. I told her she was doing adulthood like it was a recipe she didn't oversalt. And she said, "That's because they taught me mise en place for feelings." By September, the building had a new roof, paid for by a boring loan with a beautiful rate and a maintenance reserve because I refused to let a future Linda curse a past Linda for false economies. The quiet bench was the prettiest piece of furniture on the block. The staff council voted to fund 3 certifications and 2 ESL classes. A server who had been couch surfing moved into her own place with the deposit the Hands Fund floated until her first check cleared. I left a potholder on her doorknob like the fairy godmother of casseroles. The town kept trying to hand us a crown, and we kept nodding and putting it in the lost and found. The paper printed a piece called "What If Ownership Wasn't a Flex?" with a photo of Rosa's hands and a quote from me. I didn't get revenge, I got a Rhoda. I'm putting it on a t-shirt for our staff picnic with proceeds to the Hands Fund, because I'm not above a little merch when the slogan is good and the beneficiary is better. And then, one morning in early November, I woke up at 5 without an alarm and smelled the year. You know that smell. Cold whispering at the windows, the house thinking about winter. I padded into the kitchen, pulled out butter like a co-conspirator, and wrote a list in the margin of the grocery flyer. Sage,
cranberries, evaporated milk, pie crust insurance, frozen in case my hands forget. Emma texted, "Phones in basket sign ready, basket cleaned. Thanksgiving is coming." We plan Thanksgiving like NASA now. Phones basket at the door next to a bowl of wrapped peppermints, my mother's trick. Seat cards written in my plain hand. A little sign that says, "If you must post, post your recipe." The no-show, no-dough clause no longer hangs like a storm. It sits like a foundation. We've missed our 3 and 5. The sunset moved the fund. The world didn't end. It began differently. We still gather. The difference is who benefits when we don't. The day arrived. The turkey went in early. I rubbed it with butter and sage because some habits are bones. I ironed the tablecloth and thanked it for surviving last year's story. I lit candles that smell like leaf, whatever that is. At 3, Danny walked in with rolls, throwing cold air and jokes. At 3:30, Ashley came with cranberry sauce that had whole berries and a look that said, "I tasted as I went." At 4, Emma came with the phones and basket and a boy I liked immediately because he asked where to put the basket like it mattered as much as the pie. We put phones in the basket, mine too. We sat, we held hands. I said grace, which was mostly a thank you note to the people whose backs ache. We ate, we told the story of the year, out loud, on purpose, without sharpening it for an audience. We toasted Tom with iced tea because he liked to pretend it was bourbon and make the same joke every year. This year, it's oaken. Halfway through, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find 3 of our dishwashers holding a foil pan the size of a child. "For you," one said. Tamales. We hugged. They didn't come in, family time is family time, but we stood on the porch and exchanged plates like neighbors. The turkey sizzled in the oven because the oven was still on for the sweet potato casserole. The house smelled like the idea of home.
After pie, I took the basket into my bedroom and set it on the bed and looked at it the way you look at a baby monitor when a child is sleeping in peace. Then I came back to the table and poured coffee and listened to Ashley tell a story about a woman at the pantry who learned to fix a sink and cried in triumph. We didn't stream anyone's dinner this year. We didn't need to. We were here. And just when he would have expected a grand finale written for a headline, he forgot I was writing a life. Stick with me because you'll want to see how this plays out. We still had one more public chapter to close. The court put a final stamp on our management arrangement in December, and the trademark matter settled with mutual politeness. The bank renewed our line of credit at a rate that made me send to Sean a pecan pie he hid from his family for an hour. The Hands Fund quietly paid for a wisdom tooth extraction and a transmission. The Harbor Pot distributed its first real "that's not nothing" to staff. And a line cook bought his mother a coat that fit. He hung the receipt on the bulletin board like a medal. I started teaching my night classes' second section, and because life is funny, a student from the chain with the scarecrow TM sat in the front row and took notes like they were a rope ladder. "We do a lot of activations," she said in week 2. "I want to write a comp policy on the wall." I said, "Write it. Nail it. Ask them to hold you to it." She nodded, cried for 40 seconds, and then asked about food cost targets, because we are not our tears alone. In January, Rose's daughter got into community college. We gave her a little scholarship from the Sunsetted Family Fund, and she looked at the check like it was a door. "For books," I said, and she said, "For everything." And we hugged for a long time in the dry storage room because the cans don't mind. Brian sent a New Year's card from his mother's town. Him in a plaid shirt, holding a ladle, grinning like a person who understands that food tastes better than applause. "Soup season," the card said. It didn't ask for anything. I put it behind Tom's letter in the folder and closed it with my palm flat, as if I could bless the entire year with that gesture. What's left? Boring, glorious work. The trust vests, the building ages, we paint things, we fix the ice machine sooner than later, we keep the quiet bench sacred, we hold Sunday leftovers even when it snows, and in our town it always does on the day you least expect. We bring out space heaters and hold mugs in both hands and tell people, "Sit, rest, there's enough."
If you came here for revenge with confetti cannons, I hope you're not disappointed to find spreadsheets and soup. I didn't ruin a man. I rebuilt a table. I'm a 66-year-old woman with a blue folder, a red cardigan, and a dining room full of people who know where the mop lives and where the money goes. My shock was turned into shelter. My anger was turned into governance. My no became a door that opened for a lot of somebodies who've been told their whole lives to come back when the lighting is better. The turkey sizzles in the oven again now and then. The family streams no one's dinner. If they don't come one year, the pantry does. There is always a chair. We can't fix every empty table, but we can fix ours. So when you ask me what he got, Brian, or any man who thought a woman with a folder and a cardigan wouldn't use both, I'll tell you, he got exactly what he deserved. Consequences that fit, a chance to make soup without a stage, and the relief of a town that decided to love him better by taking away the thing that made him forget himself. And I got what I deserved too, the quiet satisfaction of a register that closes with a click, a ledger that ends in black, a staff meeting where the dishwasher corrects the chef's math, gently and correctly, and a Thanksgiving where the only thing on a screen is the recipe Emma pulls up for sweet potato pie when she calls me because she forgot if it's 2 eggs or 3. It's 2. Add a scandalous amount of butter. Don't apologize, they'll eat it. By the time the daffodils were showing off in everybody's scruffy front yards, our kitchen had the rhythm of a good choir. Altos holding the line, me, sopranos soaring, Emma, when she remembers to breathe, and the percussion section in the dish pit steady as rain. I'd started sleeping like a person again. No 3 a.m. bolt upright, no did we pay the produce guy, no dreams about ring lights flickering like interrogation lamps. I still kept the blue folder within reach, old habits and all that, but now it lived on the shelf by the back door, right between the first aid kit and the lint roller. Appropriate placement for emergencies, expected and otherwise.
The next week, the culinary school hosted a little ceremony for the first 3 community table scholars, funded by the Sunset of the Family Fund and the shoebox tips and a check Mrs. Lake mailed from Florida with collards on the memo line. The scholars were exactly the people you hope they'll be. A 20-year-old who wants to be a nurse because he's good at keeping people calm. A 40-year-old mother of 2 who wants an HVAC certificate because her landlord never shows up. And Rose's daughter, studying accounting with a minor in making her mother cry from pride. I stood in the back and clapped like a woman at a Little League game who swore she wasn't going to get loud this year. We put up a small, ugly plaque behind the host stand that only staff can see. It says, "Post the policy, count the money, feed the people, go home." If you want to know what it feels like when revenge turns into a creed, it's that. 4 lines, no flourish, and your feet not hurting as much at the end of a double. And just when he would have expected the credits to roll, he forgot there's always an epilogue in a kitchen. Stick with me, because you'll want to see how this plays out. I'll tell you about one last night, the one that made me understand the whole story landed where it needed to. It was the first cold snap, the kind where breath shows up and makes you feel like you might be a dragon if you try hard enough. We were short 2 servers and heavy on reservations because everyone remembers how soup tastes when the wind bullies. The line was humming, the dining room a soft roar. Emma posted "phones in basket" by the door of my house that afternoon, and my table at home was set for Sunday leftovers later. But first, this night. 2 men came in at 8 without a reservation, one in a hoodie, one in a suit trying to look like a hoodie. The suit sniffed for a manager like a bloodhound. He said, "We're doing a piece on matriarchs of the New South. We want your Nana on the cover." He smiled like he just handed us a tiara and a liability. Emma smiled back the way I taught her, kind, unmovable. She said, "Nana doesn't do covers, but she'll answer your questions if you volunteer at the pantry next Saturday." "We can't," Suit said, baffled. "Then you can't," she said, and pointed at 2 bar stools. "If you'd like soup, the line cooks made chicken and rice good enough to make you call your mother." They sat, they ate, they left a decent tip. They didn't ask again. I didn't know any of this until closing, when Emma told me, and we laughed until my back hurt. Matriarchs of the New South, I said, and made a face like I'd smelled a candle called brand. I'm a woman with a folder and a mop. Exactly, she said. That's the headline. We locked the door and did the sweep. Plates stacked, knives counted, money to the safe. I turned off the last switch and stood in the dark a beat longer than usual. The place made its after-hours sounds, compressors sighing, the ice machine gurgling, some ghost of heat shifting in the ducts. I pressed my palm against the window, where if I look just right, I can see us a year ago through the glass. The shoebox of tips, the pickle jar of donations, the night it all turned. Then I met my own eyes and thought, we did this. At home, the table was set for whoever needed it. Some nights that's family, some nights it's neighbors, some nights it's the aunties who claim they're only stopping by to return a Tupperware and end up staying for pie and a debate about whether clove belongs anywhere near a sweet potato. Verdict, yes, but lightly. The basket by the door held our phones like eggs. We ate without screens and told each other day stories instead of captions. When Ashley got up to rinse plates, she put a hand on my shoulder, light, steady, and said, "Mom, thank you for not punishing me. Thank you for making a place to learn." "I punished you," I said, honest. "I just made sure the punishment fed someone." She laughed and shook her head. "You and your spreadsheets. Me and my love letters. Same thing if you do 'em right." We took pie to the porch and let November bite our cheeks. Emma texted the pantry group chat. From the basket, I made an exception because she was confirming volunteers, and the little machine dinged, then went quiet, face down. The house glowed that gentle yellow of a day done right. I wore Tom's flannel and a pair of socks that could be classified as a cry for help. The turkey carcass simmered for stock on the stove, ticking the lid like a metronome. If you'd told me a year ago that revenge would sound like that, like broth and breath and the hum of a place you built to last, I would have laughed. But here we are. Here's the part where you want the fortune cookie. The one-sentence lesson from 1,000 sentences. I'll give you 3 because I'm generous and bossy. First, if you're ever left out, light the room you're in. Don't burn down the one they chose.
Second, write it down. The love, the rules, the money. Paper is how you make promises keep. Third, feed people. You can do a lot wrong and a lot right will follow if you just feed people and tell the truth about the bill. And if you came here for justice, not soup, if you wanted a gavel bang, then take this. The man who toasted family without the family learned to work without applause. My daughter learned to love without a script. My granddaughter learned to point a camera at hands, not faces. And I learned that the sharpest tool in my kitchen drawer was never the knife. It was the claws. It was the side letter. It was me remembering I was the adult in the room and acting like it without becoming mean. We still have bad days. Vendors still deliver basil that thinks it's lettuce. A guest still sends back a steak because it looked at me funny. The ice machine still picks fights. But the dining room is ours. The wall is ours. The future is ours, plural. If I get hit by a bus, fine. If I take a long vacation, the lights will still come on and the soup will still get ladled, and someone will still say, "Behind, kindly." The turkey will sizzle again this year. I'll rub it with butter and sage at 6 in the morning because some habits are a kind of prayer. And if somebody's late, we'll make them a plate. If somebody misses it, the pantry won't. That's the point. That's the plan. That's the revenge. So steady and so decent that it stops feeling like revenge and starts feeling like home. Now it's your turn. What would you have done in my place on that first cold night with the turkey cooling and the phone lighting up with a dinner you weren't invited to? Would you have driven to the restaurant, signed the paper, hosted the town, or something else entirely? Tell me in the comments. I'm listening, and I keep a fresh legal pad handy.
So, another story of my grandmother has end. And be clicking here, you will have when more such stories.